Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Firefighters podcast, where we seek to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operator through a series of wide-ranging conversations. Now, before we go any further, just hit that rate, follow, or subscribe button on whatever platform you're listening to. It's a key performance indicator for us and helps us reach even more people. Now, here's what we've got for you today. Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you are feeling good. It is January the 1st, 2023. Another year set to begin, and a big thanks to so many people that have sent in some wonderful wishes and emails. Seeing your contacts, seeing your messages has just weaved so many motivations, so many inspirations, so much gratitude. It is incredibly humbling that people are coming back to the podcast, that they're finding some value in it. It's a really exciting time for us, and we do not in any way take your contact, your messages, your support, and your consistent listenership for granted. This is a strange and surreal privilege to be continuing to do this, and the success, if we can call it that, of the podcast, I will give that accolade to the incredible guests that we are privileged to be able to share. Many of these are not practice speakers. Many of these are frontline, hands and feet in the mud practitioners. These are people looking for strategies, tactics, approaches, and creative and innovative ways to be able to serve their communities better, serve their families better, look after their teams, their watches, their organizations. And it's a massive privilege to be doing it. And the guest that we're bringing to you today is honestly, and I know I've said this, I'm guilty of saying this many times, I think this is one of the best episodes I've ever done. And again, I give the reason for that to our wonderful guest today is Jaqui Wilmshurst. Jaqui is a senior consultant and psychologist focusing on psychological health and safety, wellbeing, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. She is an overwhelmingly brilliant, creative, collaborative, curious, and innovative leader. She has such a rich and authentic background. In the frontline services, she has done many firsts, and I'm sure there will be many more to come. I would almost be guilty for referring to her as an academic because of the somewhat overwhelming amount of knowledge bombs that she is about to drop over the next 2 hours if you stay with us. So just before we get in there with Jaqui, I just want to reinforce again that massive thanks to everyone that is out there working in the emergency services. There are some really challenging times happening at the minute, from changes in culture to organizational structure to pay to economical challenges. And to many people, a career in the emergency services, and certainly for me, it is incredibly satisfying. There's amazing prospects, amazing people. There's progression, there's access to training, development, opportunities. And it can be stressful. It can be distressing, and you can face many dangerous situations. But to echo again, you get the opportunity to interact with some of the people that we try to bring to you on the podcast. It's an exhaustive list, and I constantly feel plagued with a sense of both privilege, but also regret and almost duty that there's more people to speak to that I fear will never get a chance to speak to. And I have conversations on a daily basis with people that I just feel add so much value to the world. So before I head off on that rabbit hole too much longer, I wish you every success in the new year. Whatever that success means to you. It doesn't have to be financial, it doesn't have to be career. I wish you happiness, contentment, fulfillment, personal drive, satisfaction, love for the thing that you do. And on behalf of the thousands of people that listen who perhaps are not part of the emergency services, many people contact us because they simply admire and have a tremendous amount of gratitude for people that do the jobs that we all do in this sector. So on behalf of them and all the messages and emails that we get, thank you. Thank you for what you do. Please keep doing it. Find that nugget of optimism in the days when you maybe don't feel appreciated, or you don't feel like your work is valuable, or you can't quite understand the why behind what you're doing. What you do is amazing, and it's a privilege to be able to exist and work alongside all of you. So thank you for your support. If you want to support the podcast even more, that first little step is simply to subscribe, follow, or rate the podcast wherever you're listening. Despite the many people that do listen, only 57% of you actually subscribe to the podcast. It's great that you listen, but if you do subscribe, if you do follow it, then you stand the best chance of being able to hear some of the incredible people and content that hopefully we're going to bring to you over this next 12 months. And finally, as we continue to try and reach more people and grow our ability to bring this to you, if you do want to support the podcast, we have a Patreon page, which you can go over and take a look at. If you want to support the podcast in that way, we're tremendously grateful for it. So without further ado, to kick off January 2023, please buckle your seatbelts, and it's my pleasure to bring to you Jaqui Wilmshurst. Jaqui, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Oh, I'm good today. Actually, someone's just covered my knee in something nitrate. to basically I've got a wound on my knee. I've just finished surgery, but and they put something on it and it's stinging like heck. But other than
Not
that,
good.
I'm doing great. Just a bit of a personal information there.
Yeah.
We first sort of came across each other, or more specifically, I came across you because you're a very, very busy lady. With regards to some of the work you've done with a close friend of ours. But as I kind of got into the background with you, and I'll be brutally honest, I kind of stalked you on LinkedIn for a little bit, which is somewhere I don't go enough. LinkedIn is definitely a place for professionals, and this isn't a LinkedIn advertisement, but you know, when I started to go down the rabbit hole of yourself as you put yourself on there as a senior consultant, neurodiversity, mental health, psychological safety, inclusion and belonging. To be honest, the big one that stood out for me there was this aspect of psychological safety, which really kind of jumped out for me. But I actually wanted to start by maybe going back and starting your career as an officer in the British Army. So that was something that really kind of reassured me that we'd have a great conversation, because I know a whole bunch of people from ex-military and Marines and special forces and stuff like that, and they have I'm going to say a beautiful simplicity to them, which is not by any means meant to be derogatory, but what I mean by that is they're very assertive, direct, they've got great conditioning and discipline and all these kind of things, but they've also, surprising how many have got quite a high level of emotional intelligence as well. So could you first sort of take us back to your time serving in the UK, Germany, the Balkans, Northern Ireland, and what made you want to join the army to start with?
Well, I was always very outdoorsy, always on the move. But the shorter version of the answer to that would be via a pub, because
Via a pub, where all the best plans are made.
After I left school and before I went to university, I didn't do the gap year as they talk about it, going off backpacking, but I did take a year off and I worked in a pub full time. Okay. To save a bit of money, actually, because I wanted to go into railing. But the pub I worked in happened to be a student pub in Sheffield, where the officer training corps, the university, where you can basically, alongside university studies, you can be a cadet, sort of either in prep for joining the regular army or just not. But it's part of the territorial army as it was then.
Okay.
And they used to drink in there, and they got to know me, and they knew I was quite like I said, outdoors, straight talking, keen for adventure. So they invited me to come and learn a bit more about what they were doing at that university. And when I went off to university, I joined the officer training corps in Wales. I went to Swansea University, and I got pretty into it. Never intended to join the regular army. Really enjoyed it during my time of studying or not so much studying, playing pool and doing military stuff. And then when I finished university, I wasn't really that sure what I wanted to do. And quite a few friends had joined, and it actually just sounded like it was worth a shot.
What kind of thought process did you have about the military or the army or things before that? Because you say it wasn't part of any of your plans in your sort of teens.
No, and I had a couple of uncles that did national service, and my dad just missed it through his age. But really no particular history of service in the family at all. So it's completely new to me. But I just got very much caught up in all these opportunities for travel, adventure, lots of training. I was one of these people who went every course that was on offer to me. I trained in Royal Engineers.
That is so much like me. I'm always that. Yeah. Some people say no when they don't even know what they're saying no to. And also the people have this premonition that what's happening now is forever. Do you know what I mean? They think, if I say yes to this now, oh God, I don't fancy doing that forever. And I'm like, nothing is forever. Everything we're doing is just a capture of a moment in time. It is not who you're going to be in 10 years.
Exactly. So and also I'm just one of these people, like many in the army, I think, I learn by doing. And I can think about things till the cows come home, and I won't quite work out what I can go in circles for hours on end. But if I dive in and try something, then I've long since learned not to feel bad if I try something and it's not right.
I think there's something to be said there. Sorry to go straight off on a tangent, but I think very much around people that operate in frontline sectors like the military, like the emergency services, are very much kinesthetic learners. Yeah. And sometimes as we have begun to fold more of an academic edge to some of the things that we do, whilst that comes with a greater level of professionalism and allows us to expand our learning, it can be very difficult for people in our sector. And I'm just going to speak on my own behalf as a kind of a knuckle-dragging firefighter. And there are some firefighters significantly more academic than myself, but a lot of us are more hands-on kinesthetic learners, which kind of lends itself to the job that I think most people think is within those sort of sectors. Does that make sense?
It does completely make sense. And actually, I think that might be a topic we'll come back to in a bit, because
I'd love to.
There's more I could say about that sort of diversity of thinking and styles and learning and all sorts else.
So as you sort of went into, so did you actually still have to do any sort of basic training going into
It's the military
yeah,
academy, so it's a year at Sandhurst.
okay. So you still have to, you still have to do the soldiering aspect before you go straight into the leadership officer style thing of
Correct.
Sandhurst.
Yeah, so the first 5 weeks at Sandhurst is supposed to mimic basic training, so that everybody is on that even playing field, that everybody's done that same few weeks where you start out in a.
Yeah, does a lot of that come from an aspect of like authenticity, for want of a better description? Because Sandhurst is obviously delivers a wide variety of leadership development training and loads of stuff across the globe, more than anything else, I suppose. But it is sometimes a common theme that people have challenges. I mean, we're having it now in the emergency services where we're starting to do leadership development where we have people coming in on, and my brain is going to go completely to mush now, but we used to have like industry has graduate programs, and they're not graduate programs.
It's
now.
like a sort of fast track or management.
Yes, because
yeah.
I think there is an important distinction to be made between the different level, and it's something I know we're going to go into later on, the different type of person and or skill sets that required to do leadership roles, whereby, I think the worst thing sometimes is when you do see firefighters and or soldiers that make it to the higher echelons of that particular service because they won't necessarily have the tools required to get them there. I always say if someone's a fantastic firefighter, it doesn't mean they're going to be a great leader of people, a great commander.
Absolutely. And I think the same in any
totally different skill set.
Where, I think I've worked in so many different sectors now, and I've seen the same problem recurring. And if it's an either or thing, you see the problems on both sides, that you can get people highly technically skilled, highly experienced, highly all those things, don't have particularly brilliant skills around leadership management, or frankly don't want to. They want to be promoted, maybe they want. So I've seen, but if you have people coming in who haven't done the job in the first place, that's that us and them, and that feeling like you don't get it because you haven't been where we are.
It's
and
like
what
trying
I've
to close
seen
that
work
chasm,
well,
isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah, what I've seen work well is when you have a blend and everyone respects each other's differences. So those that maybe come in as leaders and managers who haven't done the job on the ground need to be open-minded to learn from those who have, and those who have need to be open-minded to learn more around the skills around leading and managing. But I've seen, for example, in the tech sector where I've worked, is that they're now offering more sort of professional development tracks that don't have to be management ones. So for people who just say, frankly, I'm no good at managing other people and I never will be and I don't want to be, but where do I go? They're starting to try and have like subject matter tracks.
I've seen that, yes. I think I've seen that in Meta and a few other companies where they do have. Yeah. Oh, have you really?
Yes.
Crikey. Okay, we'll go on to that at some point. But yeah, where you get to some point where, because I used to work in a fast-moving consumer goods company, and I was a CI lead for a long time, just continuous improvement. And you may have done it, the Six Sigma and Kaizen and all that sort of stuff. But my biggest challenge many years ago was delivering through others, funnily enough. I was what's called an individual contributor, and I excelled in that. And it was like things wouldn't, obviously things would work when I wasn't there. But what I mean is if I would go into a team and I would make an efficiency change or things would go great, my biggest challenge was people were like, yeah, but it doesn't work if you're not there. And that's not because I'm special at all. But the point I'm trying to make is delivering through others. The true example of leadership is that you take the person away, and it's like that soft hand on the tiller, isn't it? It almost shouldn't matter if they're not there, which is a real challenge for people that go, what's that leader even doing? If you say that about a leader, that means they're probably doing most of the time. Probably means
they're being very facilitative,
unless there's the place in chaos and they're not doing anything. But usually, if it looks like they're doing nothing, it's because they probably have such a high level of things.
Yeah, and that I see the individual contributor track was what there was at what was then Facebook, now Meta. But so yes, to your question about military academy is absolutely, they wanted to. It's that integrity thing that says everyone who's gone through, if you're an officer, that you've still done all the crawling face first through the mud and having your head trodden on in the puddle and things that I'm sure don't happen anymore. But
part of you hopes they do, because there must be some real character building within that, because ultimately to build strong character you still have to be able to every now and again, and I know it's different in the political landscape that we're in now, to have a finger pointed in your face and be able to take a brutal truth. It's horrible actually, we associate the word brutal with truth sometimes, but people tend to deliver things, certainly in my sector I can only speak, there's a wonderful bluntness to which we deliver information. And if you can't take that, it's great if you as a leader can develop the skill sets to deliver feedback a little bit more candidly without it being blunt and vicious.
And I think that's the thing, though, we've got to keep in sight, context dependent, that, if you're in the military or in your emergency services, I have worked for a fire service as well. In that context, if you're going to be in the military and you're potentially likely to be deploying to very unstable or volatile or outright conflict environments, and it's going to get noisy and scary, and things are going to be happening that, yes, you're trained for, but you've maybe not done before. Is people are going to be screaming in your face, people are going to be shouting commands. You have got to be able to listen quick, do it quick. I'm absolutely imagining the same in what little I've learned about firefighting, and it isn't much in the grand scheme of things, but obviously when you're wearing all sorts of breathing apparatus and the noises that I know, speaking to Lee, some of the noises when you're going into situations, that makes sense, that you can't take offense that someone shouts in close proximity to you. However, what we don't need is that happening in nice, quiet office.
That's where I think we struggle historically, and I don't know. Again, it's wonderful to be able to speak from different sides of the coin, because I don't know anything about the military aspect of it, but from a fire service perspective, we often lean on our practical capabilities and almost use it as a comfort blanket. Do you know what I mean? And honestly, it's less than 10% of the job. Not to say it's not important, it's very important, but similar to military in a capacity, I'm sure people could do 20, 30 years in the military and maybe only see conflict for 1 or 2 years, if that. It's a very small part of the job, yet we lean on it and go, practically we're fantastic. And I'm like, yeah, that's not where we're doing the damage. No one's saying you're crap at your job operationally. What they're saying is the damage gets done in the watch room, it gets done on the parade square, it gets done in those quiet, interactions of that person's development, or that person's place within the team, or the way that they're rewarded, or the way that they're acknowledged. Is those aspects where I always say the hard skills are the soft skills. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they're the ones.
I mean, soft skills is a horrible term. It's such a horrible term. You know, the skills I've seen people struggle with the most throughout their lives and careers are the ones called the soft skills.
Yeah.
You know, the dealing with other human beings and dealing with their own.
I wonder why we termed it as soft skills. Is it something about?
I don't think it was meant to be derogatory. I think it meant less tangible, really. I think it was meant to mean, technical skills. Like if there's an equation, there's or if you're balancing your accountancy, but there are facts, there are answers, there are technical skills that if you add this to this, that'll happen. And I think it was originally just supposed to really mean these are the skills around the things that are very hard to define. They're very individual. They're very movable. Hard to put your finger on, really. But it's become a really derogatory sort of term.
Yeah, you can understand why, because if someone is demonstrating skill sets that might mean they can build rapport with people that are really struggling, some people might go, oh, that's because you're soft. And there's a very significant difference between characterizing somebody as soft, when really I think the people who are most brittle are the people that have that narrow spectrum and actually don't have the ability and the humility to be able to go to each end and demonstrate their intelligence, I suppose. I wanted to echo back for a second, if we could, and just sort of close the loop on that army officer training, and if there was any particular key characteristics that you could reflect back on as sort of themes to the overarching training that they obviously they deliver so successfully.
It's a good question. I mean, it's a long time ago now, but I mean, the year is based primarily on infantry training. So regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, and regardless of what arm or service or part of the army you're planning to go into, you don't know at the beginning anyway. That's kind of level playing field. So most of it is based around going out on, you've got all the marching, the coordination of marching to band, but it's all about discipline, following commands, making your body do the things it's supposed to do, and working as a team. Because if you mess up that, you mess it up for everybody. But going out on exercise was very much around scenarios of warfare. And it was a combination, really. That I suppose one of the things I did like was the combination, a little bit linked to that hard and soft skills, where there are certain things that there are essentially manuals, like this is what you do, these are the steps you take, this is how this weapon works, this is how you use it, these are the safety drills, this is what its range is, this is what damage it will do, etc. This is how you work out particular scenarios. And then there's all the bit where you're having to learn to use your own judgment, often under extreme pressure, really fast processing. So it's kind of rule following 1 minute. So people used to say that to me, knowing me, and saying, how on earth are you managing to be in the army? Like, I'm not a very rule following kind of person. But I'm actually quite, it's that context thing again, come back to that word over and over again, that if I see rules that make sense to me, and someone's bothered to come up with them, like weapons handling, safety, I just think, right, those rules make complete sense to me. Why would I not follow them? Why would I try and make my own ones up and shoot myself or someone else? Whereas, when you get rules like, oh, back then, so many rules around women, what we could and couldn't do, and it wasn't based on anything to do with what we could or couldn't do. And those are the ones I'd kick against. But in the training, I did like the combination of working out how to think on my feet, how to kind of hone some of the skills. Though I realized working behind bars did some of that. Lots of drunk people throwing commands at you in quick succession on a Friday night, 5 deep. Mental arithmetic. But so that wasn't bad preparation, actually, doing that full time. But joking aside, yeah, I did like developing, finding out some of the strengths I'd got, and then the other slightly classic when people say it, but finding out that my limits were further than I thought they were was good learning. I suppose some people can spend a lifetime not really finding out what they're capable of, and there's something about that training that when you keep thinking that's absolutely it, you've had enough, you couldn't possibly be any colder, any wetter, any more tired, and still think straight, and then you realize you can.
Yeah.
So I quite like that, discovering things about myself and finding out
kind of widens out that spectrum even more, I suppose. You mentioned something there which I thought was really, really interesting about almost about there was bits in there around assertiveness and command presence, but also it echoed back in my mind when a lot of what we're doing now is based around things like national operational guidance, and that word guidance versus rules. Because actually, I'm going to sort of shoot myself in the foot now with probably another sexist term, because I forget where it came from, but it was, rules are for the obedience of. Now wait a minute. Rules are for the interpretation of wise men and the obedience of fools, and that really rings true for me, whilst without the male connotation in there. Where we sit now in emergency services is all built very much around guidance, and it says yes, if A, B, and C are in the right places as 1, 2, and 3, then this is the ideal guidance. But use your initiative, and some people really struggle with that because some people very much like to have a set plan and structure.
That is that diversity again, isn't it?
That is, again, you're absolutely right. And we can't be so restrictive in today's world where there are so many moving pieces. Especially when it comes to people.
And that's why I think there needs to be clarity around when, because that can become a woolly term. I was involved in a research project years ago, just briefly helping out, doing some interviews, but it was NHS, it was for protocol-based care. Okay. And the same thing, it's midwives I was speaking with, but some of them were saying, protocol for them meant rules. They were like, if we follow the protocol, everything's okay and we're all right. Whereas others would say, no, the protocol is a guide rail for me, I know that their steps are there for me to go away from and come back from. They said, but we will still make our own decisions based on changing information or changing circumstances. And the exact same protocols were being used completely differently by different people.
Yeah, whilst it's going to be something that I know we come on to later, but as I hear you speaking there, what I hear echoing through is psychological safety, because that for me says an environment of fear. That there's been created an environment of fear where we feel like we need to stick to protocol, otherwise X, otherwise what will happen to me? I won't be supported, I won't be looked after. And maybe I'm going out on a limb here, but that sense of organizational safety that doesn't just belong to those in the higher echelon, that really stretches to the outer limits of organizations, is where I believe we can truly embrace guidance, because we believe that if I operate out of the best of intentions and I've made an analytical risk assessment in my head, then, or dynamic, sorry, then I will be protected because I'm operating out of this guidance. But you're right, I think, and am I hearing you correctly there, in the sense that does fall into things like psychological safety, or am I making a stretch there?
Well, when I can say more whenever you're ready to come onto that properly, but no, you are right. And actually, as you say, it depends on, like, if you're imagining if it is in patient care, the outcome of following a protocol, if it's to do with saving a life or protecting a patient's health, that's one outcome. And then the other outcome is it a blame culture? If something goes wrong, it isn't just about whether a patient suffers or worst case dies or has another illness or an injury. It's also whether that professional could lose their job and or worse, be prosecuted in some way. So I think it's both things. It's the outcome itself, and then there's any legal judgments.
I think there's different ends of the spectrum of that sort of dogmatic approach. If we were just to, there was something about the Nazis, you say, we're only following orders. And you just think, but you're doing something terrible. You know what you're doing is wrong. But anyway, so when you left the military, you retrained as an applied psychologist, which is something that I would absolutely love to do. Clearly not enough to draw me away from what I'm doing at the minute. And I hate it when people say that, because in my mind, I'm like, well, what's stopping you doing it then? But it's kind of what's been the birth of the podcast, to be honest, is that absolute fascination in human behavior and people's blueprints. And you kind of went into specialize in environmental risk and personal and community resilience. But I wanted to ask first, like, how long did you spend in the army? And so what made you want to leave and go on to that next chapter?
Yes, good question. You're probably getting the impression by now, none of my life has been particularly planned in advance. It's usually
it's connecting the dots looking backwards, isn't it?
Yeah, very much. It's just things that happen, people I've met, decisions I've made. Sometimes I've been known for my impulsivity at times in life. I think I'm settling down as I get older. But no, the army thing, I had not actually meant to do it. I was a bit ambivalent about doing it. I figured eventually that I'd only know if I wanted to do it by doing it, so I did.
Okay.
And the short service commission, once you've done the year at the military academy, the short service commission is was back then was 3 years, and then you could extend it. So I extended it, and then I just got to a point really where it is quite a long story, because I'd always wanted to fly helicopters, and women weren't allowed to fly helicopters because there are some things I won't say on a podcast that joked about which parts of you need in order to be able to fly a helicopter. But I can assure you there were no.
And I'm sure there's an aspect of that triggered you, as has done many incredible women in the past, to say, you know what, BS. I'm going to freaking do this.
Kind of. I had more tenacity than that, because when I set my sights on something, there's not a lot that will move me. But so when I was at the military academy, I was just they were going to start taking women directly into the Army Air Corps afterwards.
Okay.
At that point, if you wanted to fly, you would have to join something else, bide your time, apply, and go in as something called an E3 officer. It just meant you were kind of getting attached across. You wouldn't be an actual Air Corps officer. Oh. So I was actually, my intake at the military academy decided to take the first woman, and I applied. And this is where it is a bit of a long story, but I'll keep it as brief as I can.
No,
another woman who's a friend of mine, another woman applied a little bit at the last minute. It had not really occurred to her before, but she suddenly thought this could be brilliant. And we were both interviewed, and we both passed all the tests, and they told me that they were going to take her as the first woman because they wanted someone who went to private school.
Wow. There is an aspect of that, because...
And they told me very unapologetically that was true. They didn't even hide it.
Yeah. And I bet they didn't write it down, but it wasn't on a bloody letter. It's a massive pleasure to welcome our new partner to the podcast, Gore-Tex Professional Fabrics. Now, I've personally worn Gore-Tex for nearly 2 decades, working operationally in hostile environments, tackling challenging incidents from firefighting to water incidents and in urban search and rescue environments. Gore-Tex have a well-earned reputation for protecting professionals in the fire and emergency services throughout their family of highly innovative, waterproof, breathable moisture barriers that exceed global performance standards and are trusted worldwide. It's a really exciting and humbling moment to be welcoming Gore-Tex to the family. And the best way for you to support the podcast is to go over and find out a little bit more about all of the partners that help bring this podcast to you. So expect a lot of things coming from us in the future as we work together as a partnership to help inform, educate, and protect professionals in the fire and emergency services. Gore-Tex, going further together. Now back to the show.
They basically said that their words to me were, we want a PR figure, and it's not you.
Ouch.
Okay. I mean, credit to her. She went on and she did the course. She ended up leaving. So they didn't get the pilot they wanted out of it because other reasons, and I won't tell her story.
No, that's her story, of course.
Now, but yeah, so I went off and joined. I was thinking that there were lots. I was very interested in the Royal Engineers, and they told me a woman couldn't join the Royal Engineers if she didn't have an engineering degree, whereas men could join the Engineers without an engineering degree, because women without an engineering degree, you could only be a combat engineer front line, and women weren't allowed on the front line. So it just goes on and on. So that was out. And I was, because I'd done Royal Engineer, like the Territorial Army version of the Royal Engineers young officer training. Wow. So I was really keen, but not allowed that either. So I decided to join.
So what sort of sorry to interrupt. What sort of time? What year are we in now? Are we in 80s, 90s?
98.
98.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Just to give me some context. So we're looking 24 years ago. Okay.
But to your point about elitism and the subtleties, for example, at this point, doing sport, just as a quick aside, women by this point were allowed to play rugby because that's like a public school sport. But I was always someone who played football, and I wasn't allowed to play football because that was seen as working class. Men could do it, but women couldn't play a sport that was seen as working class. It
Wow.
got that crazy. And I was also,
98.
yeah, and
That's, I know
I
it's
was a
20, but
pool
that
player.
seems quite current though. I was,
Yeah, yeah.
I was a teenager or whatever it was in 98, and it didn't, I can't imagine us still being so far. You know what? Some of these things are such,
Well, so officers' messes, for example, could have snooker
yeah.
tables but couldn't have pool tables because it was seen as
Well,
not officer-like.
I went somewhere in London very recently for a ceremony of some form, and I forget what it was, but it was basically, there's a couple of officers' mess style clubs still in London, and I'm not even gonna attempt to name the one that I went to, but when I went there, and I said, oh, there's a lot of sort of lords and whatnot around, and he says, yeah, we don't allow women in the club. And I sort of chuckled about it, and he said, "No, no, it's still a thing today." I said, People can bring wives or partners." And then they sort of made a running joke around like there'd be certain officers that would bring a different woman every night, and the man on the door would always be like, "Good evening, Mrs. Jones," and then the next night it would be, "Good evening," even though it was a totally different woman. And this was last year, and I was
Doesn't
like,
surprise me.
"How the hell does this? How is this place even still?" Existed, but it was a very nice place inside, but it was very tucked away sort of officers mess, and I was like, wow, it really took me back, anyway, sorry I digressed, but I was like,
No, well,
wow.
I sort of took us off on that slight tangent, but I still find it quite, it's sort of amusing now with a bit of time and distance, but imagine my indignation at the time of like, anyway,
Yeah.
of the things I just, the education and training, my thinking at the time, which I'm quite pleased about because it has sort of stood me in good stead, is I thought, if I go and do education and training, that's a very transferable skill set. And if I don't end up flying and I leave, rather than joining, the role, I mean, logistics isn't bad, but say Royal Artillery, I thought you'd have your general leadership stuff. But it turns out both my parents started out as teachers. My mum retrained, but I just turns out teaching's kind of in the blood somehow anyway. But so I went off and did that, and that was, I went off to Germany, and then during that time, Kosovo became
I
a
think.
thing, and the brigade over in Germany was spearheading that, my brigade. So I didn't go, but I ended up quite interesting jobs back home through a sort of not quite conflict, but almost, but a military operation.
Hmm.
Um, and then I did my own operational tour of Bosnia, actually, but
Wow.
that was after the peace agreement, but it was in the NATO phase of sort of rebuilding, what they called
Yeah.
the implementation, stabilization force. So that was very interesting. And while I was out there, I was having to fly in and out of different parts of Bosnia. And so there were Navy, Army, and Air Force pilots, all helicopters. But when I was flying, they knew that I'd already passed all the selection for the Army pilots course. And knowing
Ah,
that, they used to teach me quite a lot about flying.
yeah. Well, I'm
While
that
I was
person. I can't sit on a vehicle or anything like that and not ask questions. I'm
right,
asking all
right,
the questions.
they'd let me sit, or they'd sometimes be a jump seat, but they would be basically showing me everything they were doing, showing me how
Wow.
they fly. Some of them were qualified instructors, so they would show me all sorts of things. So that was a fantastic experience. And then in 2000, I'm trying to remember, I'd spent time in Northern Ireland, but eventually, I had to redo all the medicals, read all the tests, read all the exams and everything, and I finally managed to get onto the pilot's course. But
Wow.
that was kind of the beginning of the end of my army career because I really, really enjoyed learning to fly. But I ultimately left because having gone through all of that while I was training, so I qualified as a pilot, but I didn't go all the way to the military wings.
Okay.
So we had to train as a fixed wing pilot, then train as a rotary pilot. I did all of that. But they then told me that because I was this thing called an E3 officer who'd been an education officer, that after all the waiting, the everything else, they were going to only allow me 12 months flying, and then they wanted me in a desk job because of my
Oh.
education skill set, and they weren't going to allow me to fly. And they would have had me on back then it was a 4-year time bar. In other words, after training to fly, you're not allowed to
Yeah.
leave the army for 4 more years. That was when I finally said, right, enough.
That's
So
painting yourself into a weird corner where you accidentally become overqualified for something because they closed the door for so long. You actually circumnavigated the whole building
so to
and
your
ended up
point
on
of
the other
soft
side
skills,
overqualified for the thing that you wanted to do
yeah, they said,
initially.
we in the Air Corps, we don't have enough people with the sort of, they would call it the soft skills. We've got plenty of pilots, so you can have a quick go at being a pilot, but ultimately that's not the skill set we want from you. So that was when I really had enough. So that
That
was
is
the end of my army
fascinating.
career.
Absolutely fascinating. So
I stayed in the reserves for until that was 2003 that I left. I did a tour of Northern Ireland, but I stayed in the reserves and actually ended up as an instructor at the full circle. I finished my military career at the Sheffield University Officer Training Corps as a captain instructor, right where I'd first met the
that must have
people
been
in the pub.
nice.
Yeah, it
And
was.
I imagine it was probably incredibly inspiring as well. Not to make it about the sex, but for women to come. Was there other female instructors and whatnot? Again, because I'm just trying to get a gauge
Yeah.
on timelines and.
In that particular officer training corps at that moment, there weren't actually, but usually by that time, by those years, there would have been plenty. Yeah.
Mm. So for the past decade, you've been working as a consultant in the psychology of risk management and resilience across a range of professional sectors. I'm sure it's very obvious that I'm reading this bit, but I wanted to make sure I got it right. Things such as humanitarian aid, news and social media, banking and finance, public and emergency services. And just for a second, I suppose I want to reflect back, because what you've been able to do, and let's start here maybe, is something that I'd want to reflect on for a second, because so many people finish their careers in the military and the emergency services and don't always come out with tangible, applicable skill sets. So was that something that was conscious for yourself, and how well did that set you up moving into that next stage of your career, I suppose?
Yeah, I'd say a bit of a mix. Some of it was quite intentional, like wanting. I had an opportunity while serving to do a PGCE for the further education sector, for example.
Okay.
I chose not to because I knew I didn't want to become a teacher in further education, but I did know that I enjoyed delivering training. So I knew, and for example, when I was on the pilot's course, before I decided I was going to leave, the Army is the only one of the three services that allows non-commissioned officers to fly.
Okay.
And the reason that's relevant is multiple courses going through at once. There would be corporals, for example, and sergeants who'd be on the course, but they'd still need to do their kind of education for promotion, which had been my job.
Mm.
So I used to do one-to-one tutoring, in the crew room in between flying for these guys who were wanting to prep for, well, this actually links to all sorts, including neurodiversity, but basically realizing that as very kinesthetic and very experiential learners, they were being asked to do things that are very classroom based, and it wasn't always their favorite thing.
Yes.
But I really loved helping people learn, whether it was teaching or whether it was one-to-one. And it taught me something, that here I was with my dream of flying helicopters, which I did love. I really did enjoy the flying, but frankly, I was just stressed all the time that I was going to get something wrong. Stakes are pretty high. And I just kept thinking, I used to be out there flying and just thinking, what if I can't remember how to get back? Or what if I can't remember how to land? And total imposter syndrome the whole time. And I just stressed myself out. I didn't have the easy confidence of some of my other colleagues at the time. But what I did realize is that I would get to the point where sometimes I'd be doing like a session of tutoring or learning, and I'd almost be, not want it to finish when I realized I had to go flying. And
Honestly,
that was one of the things that I thought, wow, hang on a minute, I think I might, that helped me make a decision.
I feel like you're speaking to the choir, because there's a great book called The Second Mountain. Have you heard of it?
I feel like I have, but I wouldn't be able to tell you what it is. It just sounds familiar.
Yeah, there's a myriad of lessons to be drawn from it, but one of the ones I often echo about on the podcast is this aspect of the illusion that you have one goal in life, and that is the absolute precipice of what you want to achieve. For your example, for yourself, it might be achieving a leadership position within the army, or getting your wings and being able to fly. And then when you get there, what it really gives you is also a greater perspective on other things that you would like to do and achieve in life. But there also comes with it a massive requirement of humility to be able to descend from the peak that you've told everybody you wanted to achieve and that you wanted to go to, and almost enter into that second chapter of life in the true fulfillment that comes from going after your next big passion. And I kind of feel very much the same. And when I came into the emergency services, a big thing for me was I wanted to be an incredible firefighter. I wanted to be reliable. I wanted to be the person people could look to for answers. I wanted to be incredible on the drill ground. And then I wanted to be an amazing leader and be assertive and have great command presence. But what then I realized has come behind it, and what's really coming through in spades with the podcast for me, is that actually I'm head over heels in love with people. I used to think I loved the sector, but I don't. It's the people in the sector. And it's ironically the people in the sector that draw those types of individuals into it. The sector itself is just a name and a badge and a uniform. It's nothing without the people that are within it. And I'm lucky enough now to hold a position in I'm a watch commander in our training and development department, and I absolutely feed off seeing people have those same triggers, those same lights switch on that I did. And I never really thought that would be me. I just love finding a different way to communicate it and a different way to
I think that's
help somebody through the dark.
I think that's why it is good depending on your personality type, because some people wouldn't be able to be that way, but is to be very experimental in life. I mean, there's still, in some ways, there's still nothing like the feeling of being able to pick a big lump of metal off the ground with spinning rotors above you and think, I just did that. There are some ways in which flying is something that I'll never ever regret, and that sensation, physical sensation of flying, if I could have just had that, bottled it and kept doing it. But what I was recognizing was that being a helicopter pilot in the British Army at that time, for the very small amount of time that they were going to allow it was the job and the context that wasn't going to be right anymore. And frankly, I wasn't the best pilot. I was very average as a pilot, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I didn't feel like, this is it. This is my vocation. This is the thing that I'm naturally brilliant at. Funnily enough, I won an award on the pilot's course that was nothing to do. There were 3 awards you could get on the course. One was for the best sort of ground school academic scores. One was for the best flying, and one was for, they called, it was like the best character, but it was, I've forgotten how they worded it, but it was this trophy called the Horsa Trophy. But there was a guy who won the best ground school and the best flying because he was just exceptional. I think he went on to become one of the first Apache pilots. He was incredible. But I actually won the award that was about people, like my leadership, because I was the course leader because I was a captain already. So that told me something as well, that there I was being a fairly average pilot, stressed all the time and not
I'm so the same. I was so much better at leading teams than I ever was as a firefighter, because I didn't nothing more than I loved than riding on blues and twos and jumping out and going into a fire, but I couldn't see myself doing it for the next 30 years. It just doesn't excite me enough. There's a surprise a day waiting for you working with people versus, and it's not to diminish the people that do get. I almost admire people that can be fulfilled by things such as that. Not that they're simple or anything like that, but I was almost a perpetual self-torture. Maybe you've had it in the same way. You spoke about impulsiveness before and your sort of inertia to do different things and try different things, and almost a restlessness perhaps that's come with your career.
And that's what, but if I look at the thread that's run through it, is I always come back to some form. I wouldn't even just say teaching, but developing people, helping people develop. Sort of like you said, light bulb moments, enabling. And that's really where I didn't actually go to I didn't initially go to university to research environmental risk. Funnily enough, I went. I got a studentship, like a bursary, to do. It wasn't called neurodiversity then, but it was actually to do with adult dyslexia.
Okay.
And there are a number of reasons why. The supervisor I had left, and I was going to have to relocate to a different part of the country and all sorts. And so my PhD didn't end up being on that topic, but I was involved in research on adult dyslexia. And where that had come from was the sheer number of military personnel I had taught, who were predominantly men at that time, who had to come into a classroom to do this promotion course called Education for Promotion. 2 different levels. There's one from corporal to sergeant, one to go from staff sergeant to warrant officer. And they'd have to be back in a very rather than classroom-based weapons training or classroom-based technical training, this was actually educational based, having to write essays and do presentations and things. And the number of these guys, and as I said, it was mainly guys who'd come in and almost start to look quite childlike and terrified, or very defensive, a bit aggressive, a real combination. And what really struck me, bearing in mind these were all very capable, very bright people who were all doing really well, hence on their route to promotion. And then if I could have had a penny for every time one of them said, oh, I was always told I was stupid at school, or I was told I was a thickie, or I was told I was never going to come to anything. And there were lots of different reasons for that. Sometimes they had just sort of lost interest in school, dropped out. But what really struck me was that, especially when we started doing, written assignments, is how many of them were clearly dyslexic, or something else that meant, to your point earlier, they were never going to learn well in that classically reading, writing, academic environment, which doesn't suit everybody. They were a different kind of learner. So they'd found their place in the military, and then they were being stuck back in a classroom again and going, oh, seriously? And I just got very interested in how many of them, the dyslexia thing interested me because of the number of them that said that it was just really, really obvious that the difference between their intelligence levels, their abilities, their skills, and then their written work, that I would be going, there's something amiss here. This isn't somebody who's not very bright. This isn't somebody who's just lazy or not very capable. This is somebody who just doesn't communicate well like this.
So much of that person isn't making it through the filter of writing. There's
Right.
that who that person is not landing on the page, and there must be a breakdown here. Yeah.
Yeah, so my original research was supposed to be in adult dyslexia and understanding different aspects of how, if people had, not had good experiences in the type of learning environment at school, how many parts of them were staying shut down in adulthood where they could be thriving. So it was like an early form of some of the neurodiversity stuff that I know you probably want to come on to in a bit.
I want to go on to neurodiversity, but before we go there, I'd love to, again, kind of close the loop on two of the other things that I was reading as I was looking through your skill sets and things that you coach and guide people with, and that is resilience and behavior change. Only because in a world we currently sit in now of a tremendous amount of what I might term with respect mental fragility, for want of a better description, and around a lot of organizations currently as they try to answer the questions of ever-changing community needs and things like that, certainly with the emergency services, behavior change has always been a big aspect, and it's something I used to do as a continuous improvement operator, is trying to collectively take a team, embed an idea and take them, give them a good from and to, but help them believe that it was the kind of their mind. So what have you sort of learned about resilience, I suppose, and behavioral change, and how do you use that today in when working with organizations?
Yeah, another very good question. So, I mean, they're sort of related things, but quite different in some ways. Resilience, I mean, the crux of my original research, it was all field-based, but hence very applied, but it wasn't in the workplace. That was me sort of bringing it and deciding that, because I'd had a learning and development background, I realized the psychological research I'd done was very applicable in workplaces, and sort of made it fit myself, if you know what I mean. Yeah. The research was out in communities I looked at flood risk in the UK, tornado risk and hurricane risk in the States and in Belize.
Wow.
And I got some surveys done in Uganda, actually. It's great, very cross-cultural, but the bottom line was scientists saying, if we tell people there's a hurricane coming or a potential for a tornado on the ground, or that there's a flood risk, why don't they do as we tell them? And that was this classic example where these were very highly skilled scientists, very, very, very bright people, but just getting infuriated that, that equivalent of, if you don't speak the same language as someone, shouting it louder and hoping they'll understand. Scientists were kind of doing this equivalent of trying to scare people more and more to do what they wanted them to do. And my interest...
Try and drown people in truth, when truth is not really what they're struggling with.
Yeah, so my initial research sort of brief was, please, can you measure risk perception? And I said, why? And they said, well, because obviously people don't understand the risks. If they did, they would listen to us. And I was like, yeah, it's not quite as straightforward as that, actually. So I went in a much more exploratory, I made it fit me better, and was like, I actually want to find out what is going on here, rather than any assumptions of mine or yours or any scientists or anyone else's. And part of that was understanding resilience, what makes people able to live, for example, in the coastal areas of Belize, where there's hurricane season every year for several months. And just keep living with this cycle of being on alert, sometimes being hit, sometimes being not, and what keeps them able to function well. But also, when there are warnings coming in, what is it that's causing people so often not to heed those warnings? Because it's not that they don't understand the risk, mostly a little bit of risk perception in there, but that was assumed to be the main thing. So I learned a lot. Behavior change bit, of course, was part of that, because they're saying if we understand what would make people heed the warnings, then we want them to change their behaviors. But one of my questions around behavior change always is, who's it for? So in the context, for example, of natural disasters, you could say, if the scientists are hell-bent on people doing as they say, you'd say, right, if you've informed them fully in a way that they understand, and they definitely do want, you've given them a risk message in language they can definitely understand, you've given them resources to use to respond if they need to, like there are shelters or there are evacuation plans, you've equipped them fully as adults that they could heed the warning if they want to, and they choose not to, you've done your job. So you do you know what I mean? Versus, we absolutely need them to go.
Yes, but there's an aspect of them not fully... Sorry, go on. I've got an idea, but I want to hear.
Well, that's okay. No, I mean, I did write a book chapter on this, because it's now a known thing in risk psychology not to follow what they call the information deficit model, meaning it's a bit slightly sort of fancy way of really of just saying, don't assume that if someone's not doing what you want them to do, that it's because they don't understand. Try that out. It might be that they don't understand. That could be one of your, if you're going to be curious, check, do they understand? But actually there are so many
How
other
do you
things
do
as
that
well.
without seeming condescending, though? There's probably a question that's maybe worth asking.
Sure, it depends on the context. So where I was, it was me doing the research that was doing that, because none of the kind of scientists or government officials or whatever had really had the time to go in and spend time with the communities, understanding their perspective, their needs, why they would or wouldn't heed
Yeah.
warnings, who those warnings ought to come from, in what language and how, and what resources did they need in order to act on them effectively. So that was quite a big piece. But in every day in workplaces, because I do quite a lot around health behavior change, again, it's if we're working adults to adults, and these are competent adults with their own minds, behavior change is a bit of a double-edged sword, because trying to get others to change their behavior, you have to be very clear why and who's it for. Is it for them? And if so,
I was about to
why are they
say
not?
a couple of things. So, firstly, careful with that word competent. And I'm saying that with the nicest possible terms because we have, like, a fire service, a simple example. Sometimes it can be a very long-winded. If brevity is a real skill, one I'm trying to get better at, to be honest.
Yeah,
And it's like, if you try to convince somebody of an organizational change, and if you're able to articulate the thread all the way through to the fact that if we do X, we save money. If we save money, we don't have to reduce crewing, then, and we don't have to take more people off the trucks, and we can, make your life a little bit easier. Trying to articulate that and keep people on the bus all the way through that journey can be really difficult, because otherwise it seems like you're just trying to do this to save yourself money so you can pay yourself more. That's what the assumptions will be if you don't fill in any of the blanks. But I think a lot of the time isn't put into how can Jaqui or how can James or whoever follow this thread through and see that it's in their best interests, and we not lose them to the many landmines of pessimism that they'll come across.
I do get that, and that's why I do know it's very complicated, and that's why I was saying again it's so context dependent, because it's like how many people in what context, who are the risks to, what's the behavior change for. Health behavior change is often it's a combination of trying to get people to live healthy lives for their own sakes, but also reduce the burden on the NHS, etc. One of my favorite examples of brevity, though, you'll have heard of like the concept of nudge.
Mm-hmm.
Shops do it brilliantly by putting very desirable items right where you're queuing to pay, that kind of
100%.
thing.
Yep.
But one of my favorite examples was at Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam, where they were having problems with men missing the urinals.
Okay.
And there being a lot of cleaning up, and they tried loads and loads and loads of different signs that said anything from please, 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 pretty please, would you not pee on the floor, to slightly not threatening, but a little bit more coercive, or a little bit guilt tripping. And in the end, they put a little plastic fly in each urinal.
Love that.
And I may or may not have to finish that story off with the fact that a large percentage of men will just simply aim for the fly.
Yeah,
And
give them something to empower themselves.
there's your
Another one.
brevity, and they actually found a massive success. That part.
I
That
remember
one
reading one
technique.
about there was children that would get off at a bus stop near somebody's farm somewhere, and it was in a book that I read once. And he had horses in the field, and he would have signs saying, "Don't feed the horses, don't feed the horses." Don't, everything. And he'd built big signs, and he'd built higher fences, and they were still reaching through and climbing over and feeding the horses. And then it finally took it all, or someone advised him, took it all down, and he put a little bucket of their food and put a sign that says, "I like eating this," or something like that. It was incredibly simplistic.
So flipping
And the
the whole thing on
children
its
stopped
head.
giving them crisps and pizza and everything else, and they just, you know what I mean? It was a total
Yeah.
flip reversal on
But that's what I
empowering
mean about
somebody.
it's knowing, it's knowing your audience, knowing the context. That's why there's absolutely never going to be a one size fits all for
Of
behavior
course.
change. What there is that I quite like, because there was another one that came to mind then in New Zealand on hiking trails to do with litter, and they tried everything else sort of obvious, but they tried something around statistics, like
Okay.
90% of people take their trash home, and
Yeah.
I'm not saying it very well, but there was something it just sort of prompted people to go, well, I'm a good person, like I'm one of those 90, and somehow there was
Yeah.
just a lot less rubbish on the trail. But
Yes. And there's been
there's a
another
better
example of
story than
that.
that
You're right.
for it. But overall, in relation to behaviour change, in answer to close the loop, as you were saying, one of the questions is that there is now a big, in health behaviour change in particular, there's a big synthesized model that a load of health psychologists spent a long time synthesizing, 25 years of research, where they noticed that almost all behavior change sort of techniques or interventions were part of the puzzle, but never the whole one. And they put it all together and realized that there were these three main ingredients that looked different in different contexts. And the model's called COM-B, COM-B. And the beauty of the simplicity of it, even though in each different context there's a lot more to it, is the C, the O, and the M simply just stand for capability, opportunity, and motivation. And saying that lots of different ways of trying to get people to do things differently would tap into maybe two of those, but not three. So it might be equipping people and motivating them, but not really providing concrete opportunities for them to do the things you want them to do. Or it could be providing opportunities and equipping them well, but not realizing that they're not motivated. Like you said, for example, they don't see it as in their own interest. They're pessimistic about it. So if these three elements are in place, and they look different in different contexts with different people, but if all three are there, that's the highest predictor that people's behavior will change as a result. So that's getting used more and more now in health. So it was used throughout the pandemic in different contexts, in different ways. As for resilience, that's an interesting one in the workplace, because I would say it's brilliant to be resilient. Some people mix up resilience with robustness. The difference being, I like some of the engineering analogies from when I was doing the natural hazard stuff, that buildings for earthquake zones used to be built to be robust. So in other words, they'd stay solid and sort of just standing firm up to a certain sort of tipping point of, on the Richter scale, really, of force, and then they'd be rubble. So what they did is they learned to make earthquake resilient buildings, and these buildings basically move with the shocks, such that they will wobble around, a bit like, depending on people's age.
I do work with international search and rescue, and I remember reading that when they spoke about some of the revolutions in buildings, and again, it was very difficult for the Western world to go over and see them doing this, because we were so in this fixed mindset of what we'd been doing. We have solid buildings, yes, but you're in a different environment, so putting your solid buildings over here is still only going to be ineffective to a certain extent.
There are brilliant videos online of the whole Tokyo skyline just wobbling, like the buildings are like jelly. So the point of resilience really is that you can wobble all over I've forgotten whether it was an 80s thing or something, but weebles wobble but they don't fall down. But the idea that you can absorb, and people give all sorts of analogies like a tree swaying in the wind, is that resilience, you can be all over the place as long as you can find the resource to return to your upright state, whatever that. So psychologically, it's like, I think where things can go wrong around mental health perhaps is if a culture in a workplace in particular where historically there has undoubtedly not been enough care for people's psychological health and well-being. There hasn't. I think that's pretty clear. Plenty more for the physical. That took time. There's a bit of a pendulum swing, and I see it going to a point where it can be inadvertently quite parental, where people end up abdicating responsibility for themselves because they think, well, my needs to be met by my employer all of the time. And people need to know what my needs are, even if I don't say what they are. So for me, resilience is where individuals are. So if I do resilience building in a business, I'll say, do not keep thinking that your employees have to become never-endingly more resilient in the face of you giving them more and more and more work under more and more and more pressure. Like, that's not a good contract. So when I work with businesses or workplaces, I say it's got to be what we would call a psychological contract, where you're meeting in the middle. The organization says, look, we'll provide the resources, the training, the environment, the culture, all the things that allow us to work together. So, for example, access to the right resources to manage your psychological well-being, but individual employees have to be willing to be adults about it, to recognize when they're struggling, to know what resources they may need, to take good care of themselves as far as possible, to be good peers to each other, and then to know, how and where to access stuff if they find themselves wobbling more than usual. Do you know what I mean? It's like, but that's what real resilience is. But definitely some workplaces are guilty of trying to build resilience rather than actually make working practices be healthy. So there's that way round. But I also see just as many workplaces overextend and start causing employees to almost become entitled.
Yes, I see some of that. That's the bit that I don't like and that worries me. And I think you see it more, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you see it more in governmental organizations, in public sector work, because I don't know, having worked in the private sector, I almost feel there's a bit more resiliency and assertiveness sometimes in the private sector, because there's not this underlying assumption that you are getting paid no matter what, and you can just lean back on the overwhelming cushion that
I
is
have seen
the
that. I would
government.
agree with you. Sort of civil
And I
service.
hate that.
Yeah.
I regularly, I try not to. And if I think the person is emotionally in a secure enough place and I have a strong enough relationship with them, and perhaps we've not had the most effective day, or we've got a little bit lost, I think, would I pay me for what I did today? And I try and ask them the same question. And that's very singular metric. And I know there's very many intangibles around what the army and the emergency services do. But you also have to ask yourself, I personally believe, that little bit of accountability and go, it's okay. I'm not, you're not going to write yourself up a fizzer or anything like that. But you're like, no, you know what? I didn't give the very best version of myself today. I didn't utilize the resources I have to the best of my ability. And I think we can be guilty of not doing that sometimes.
Yeah, and that's why, and I know it's complicated because, if someone's done, which is where it comes onto the sort of psychological. Well, just to say another thing as well, by the way, is that because terminology can be confusing, that I've ended up putting psychological safety because, frankly, psychological health and safety is an awful lot of syllables, and I get kind of in a lot of
You've lost somebody there.
It gets a bit confused because Google did a whole piece of work which they called psychological safety that was actually more about a culture where it's okay to speak up, have crazy ideas, and not be kind of shamed about them. Yeah. So in the context of Google, they did a piece of work with Harvard where they were saying what makes the most effective Google team, and they had made the assumption that if you had, I mean, this probably isn't quite right, but let's, for example, you had the absolute top graduates in software engineering and the absolute top one of this, and so it's a team of 5, and you'd picked the top skill sets in those 5. They weren't getting on, and they weren't able to understand each other and work well together. The whole thing was crumbs. It was more just the safety to say we are all different, and we have good days and bad days, and we have things going on outside of work that probably no one else necessarily ever needs to know about. And we do sometimes need support from our peers, from our organization, from other people. And sometimes we don't even know we're struggling, and that's a difficult one. Other people have to point it out. But that kind of safety is a cultural thing. Psychological, but to the point earlier, we've got to try and stay an adult as far as possible and recognize that if we've, if we're struggling, we need to be able to spot it and be willing to do whatever we need to do to take care of ourselves and to get what we need as well. But the psychological health and safety, which is a much newer kind of coming more out of Europe and Australia, is actual health and safety as per the industry. In other words, if people are exposed to risks through their job, those risks have to be identified and managed.
Okay. And
so physical risks we know about, but whether it's something as obvious, burning buildings, or, I know there's so many other things that firefighters do, by the way, but that you have to have training, PPE, you have to, those risks are managed. An individual
that safer person concept has been going for decades, and we're more familiar with that, but it's kind of like,
and we know that there's all this
with, and
you have to have appropriate PPE, depending on whether you're a construction worker or a firefighter or a pilot. Psychologically, what's tended to happen is it's the equivalent of, imagine if firefighters were just basically taught to recognize the signs of burning on their skin and then told where to go and get medical treatment for the burns. That's where we've been at with mental health at work. There's all the stuff that's supporting people's mental health beyond work, outside of work, and all the things that people can get to find themselves struggling with. But the psychological health and safety at work is saying it's no longer acceptable just to say to people, here's how trauma affects the brain. This is how to spot if you've got PTSD or you're traumatized, and here's where to phone the EAP counselling service. That's not health and safety, because the law already says that any risks in your job that are foreseeable have to be identified and appropriately managed with control measures that match the risks. And so if people's job puts them in situations where there is a foreseeable risk of psychological harm, which I know can be different for everybody, but it's still foreseeable.
That's a big spectrum, and that can become tremendously costly to almost every sector, because there might be an argument for, so-and-so behind the counter at Morrison's could be subject to abuse from members of the public as well.
Sure, but it's not as costly as you might think, because it's come in now. The ISO 45003 is in, and now World Health Organization, International Labour Organization, it's beginning to be regulated. Health and Safety Exec are coming in to regulate now. So the days are gone of just being able to sort of do trauma awareness. It's going to take a long time, but that field is hugely growing now.
That's exciting, and I do hope to see more aspects of that coming into certainly our frontline services, because there are still many people that fall through the gaps, despite many people assuming that we've been here and visited it and we've put everything we need in place. We're still seeing alarming rates of self-harm, suicide, and decreased lengths of careers because people don't feel supported in what they do. I wanted to ask you around how this kind of fits us in with, and I apologize if you're going to have to repeat yourself in a couple of these aspects, but
That's okay.
when we're talking about an inclusive workspace, this is something where I want to try and introduce subjects such as equality, diversity, and inclusion, and this maybe those cultural aspects that people perhaps have connotations to. And if we play word association and I said inclusiveness, people might go there. And the problem with that in a lot of frontline sectors, and perhaps the military as well, is a lot of our brothers and sisters who work in these sectors, it's almost a requirement, and again, this is only from my personal experiences, and almost a survival tool to have things like dark humor, banter, that are required to sustain strong team connections. And I suppose I don't want the pendulum of creating an inclusive workspace to swing so far to the extent that we lose some of these aspects that have historically made these sectors some really enjoyable places to work. I'm probably asking that question terribly bad, but what does inclusive workspace look like to you?
I do know what you mean, and obviously I do work in diversity and inclusion myself, and so
Yeah.
I'd say inclusive to me, so a couple of different things there. One is, I think diversity and inclusion's gone very wrong if people, or it's been understood very wrongly if people think that any job role ought to be open to anyone so that you've increased diversity. What you've got to make sure is, what are the core aspects, skills, and experience needed for a role. Where businesses or companies or sectors have got it very wrong is where they've added quite spurious skills and experience that are not like cultural fit, that they're not actually required for the role, and that hampers having just brilliant diversity of experience, diversity of perspective, diversity of background. So that's gone very wrong in the past. And so increasing diversity in that way, that says you still have to have the basic abilities to do this job. It's okay to have job, otherwise we'd be binning all our job specifications. You've got to have the qualities, characteristics, abilities, potential, etc. to do the job. But our organizations and workplaces screening people out for the wrong reasons, just because of a bit like I was saying, there are no parts of my anatomy as a woman that make it any more difficult for me to fly a helicopter than a man. So screening women out for spurious reasons was a problem. So that's the diversity bit. Are you definitely making sure that anyone, regardless of, their skin color or their sexual orientation, that they can do the job? Are they getting in? And that isn't just physically, are they passing job interviews? It's, are they actually wanting to join? Like, do they actually want to be there? Is it an environment where they think it's this is a really nice sort of diverse environment with lots of different ways of thinking about things? Inclusive to diversity is, are you getting people in the door who want to be there and who are skilled and qualified, but who, these extra characteristics are not a reason for them to getting screened out, whether consciously or unconsciously, by recruiters or by managers, etc. And then inclusive is, once they're there, are those people being treated in a way that is equitable and fair? And it's not the same as equality. That used to bug me in the army, where people would say, if you women want to be on the front line, then you'll need to be this, that, and the other. And saying, well, we may or may not want to be on the front line, but you could also start respecting the things in which we're overrepresented, if you know what I mean. Some of the teaching and the nursing, instead of calling us educators and mocking and belittling us for jobs that we're doing, that actually, when I told you that, so many of the military personnel I worked with on those education courses, I could see them transforming in confidence, things that I knew they would take out into life. And that was an important job, but it was just really belittled. So the inclusive, are you, having got people in the door, are you making sure that workplace is a place they can be? To your point on humour, I've talked to Lee about this a lot, and I've also, talked to military friends. I'm a huge fan of dark humour. I know Lee is a big fan of French. She's a comedian who's sort of turned consultant, and I'm having a bit of a blank on her name. I want to say Marcy. She talks about the importance of humour at work.
Okay.
And she does a brilliant TED talk, actually. But the point she's making is, humour, when it's appropriate, and it can still be black, it depends how you define it, but is something that connects people. It's a shared experience. I know that feeling, that when I was working as a head of occupational health in a fire service in this country, and I made sure I got out and about and talked to crews as much as I possibly could. And they told me so many different stories. And one of them was, well-meaning HR departments, definitely the right intent, but, banning people in the privacy of their, I'll probably use the wrong, it's not crew room, is it? They would talk about
A
having
crew
a
room,
fire
watch room, whatever it may be.
watch room, talk
Just
about
have
having a
watch room.
fire brew and sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? Decompressing from something and being in a situation where obviously throwing some quite inappropriate, some just jokes around in the privacy of that space can be a very good way of processing a bit of emotion.
Yeah.
Laughing
100%.
instead of crying, and just, and the HR departments got wind of this happening was saying, if anyone's caught making jokes about anything in this way. And to me, that was an issue because they were asking me to help work out how to support firefighters to decompress and asking me what should I allow them to do. I said, well, first let them go back to their humor, as long as they know, we're not talking about them making jokes on the side of a motorway after a multiple vehicle pileup, about people who've died or been injured in earshot of others. We're talking about them finding ways to process the bodily reactions and their emotions with each other. The inclusive bit to me would be, are there being jokes thrown around that are at the expense of someone who's actually in the room?
Yeah.
And then that's not okay. Like, that's not really funny, and it's not useful, and it's not inclusive. So to me, there's a very big difference between humor used appropriately versus leaving people feeling degraded in some way. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And hey folks, just wanted to jump in with a quick piece around firefighter health and wellbeing. Whether you are trying to join the fire service and pass them tricky fitness tests, if you are currently serving, or if you are coming up to that next chapter of your life, retiring from the emergency services, we get so many different questions around it. So in partnership with Fitness for the Frontline, we have come up with a series of guidance and programs specifically designed to reflect the physical elements of the role of a firefighter. So whether it's carrying an LPP across an overgrown field, lifting a ladder above your head under running it, or wrestling with cutting gear for 30 plus minutes at some kind of complicated RTC, our bodies are required to lift, push, and carry objects in very specific circumstances. That is effectively what Fitness on the Frontline focuses on, as well as the longer term aspects of overall health and wellness for our firefighters. Now, we are definitely not about to be smashing out world records or getting that beach body ready in 6 weeks rubbish. The systems and programs that we put in place are adjusted for people's current fitness levels, and they're not a prescriptive weight or a one size fits all BS. It is very likely for myself personally that I'm still going to be a firefighter when I'm 60 plus, so longevity in the role is really important to me, and I know it is for so many people out there. It all starts with no obligation, 7 days worth of the programming, absolutely free. So whether you're joining, serving, or looking at the next chapter in your life, Fitness for the Frontline is designed by firefighters for firefighters. Now back to the show. I think that's something that we have been very successful in. I personally can say I only experienced aspects of bullying for the first 1 or 2 years of my career, if that, and it was never luckily directed at me. I experienced it when I was at school, so I learned to be able to identify it, but it's something I don't personally feel is as much of a problem now in many sectors as it ever used to be. But now I feel like some of the tools that you alluded to there, some of the tools are actually being used to try and suppress some of the natural characteristics that actually make for a very welcoming and vibrant and inclusive kind of workspace where people can have humor and that people want to come to work and that people want to be there. And I want to work to try and protect that as best we can. Something I don't want us to skip over, because as we were speaking about diversity there, I don't want us to skip over neurodiversity, because it's an area that I personally have a great interest in that I feel there are so many challenges that I've faced in my career that I've probably been self-created, but come from thinking and operating in a different way than those who I am seeking to be kind of perhaps acknowledged or promoted by. So speak to me a little bit about neurodiversity, the sort of path that it's gone on, and any significant changes or developments that you've seen in the sector, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, I had a real interest in dyslexia to do with my role as a sort of teacher educator, and I have a very, very strong sense of sort of justice, and therefore injustice gets me very fired up, and feeling like so many of these adults in the military who I really respected had been so let down, and would probably continue to be let down once they left the military, or even within the military, particularly around that different ways of processing information. where they are being misunderstood, misjudged, but also told to conform in ways that's just not how they're wired.
Yeah.
And I always thought it was interesting. I knew I wasn't dyslexic, but I thought it was interesting how I would find myself so fired up about this idea of being misunderstood and mistreated and made to conform. It took years before I ended up. I'm diagnosed autistic ADHD, actually. What would have been Asperger's. That label.
How did you seek that diagnosis?
It was a long
Sorry, very
process.
personal question.
No, that's okay. And I've got a very ambivalent relationship with the labels, if I'm honest, and I do consult in this, so I say this a lot. The labels are psychiatric labels. They're still technically deemed disorders. I look at the ADHD, double D, deficit and disorder, attention deficit, hyperactive disorder. The reason I will come back to answer your question in a moment about my own diagnosis, but the reason I consult the way I do is I'm kind of on a bit of a mission where, as far as I'm concerned, there are all these different neurotypes, and by neuro it is, it's your actual wiring in your brain and how you process information, how you learn. So there's lots of overlap with learning styles and other things, but this is definite hard wiring, a bit like personality types. And that's what's happened is schools and workplaces always converge on norms, like conforming. Whoever sets the rules, it's back to that guidelines, and it's like, this is how we do things around here. This is how we share information. This is how we problem solve. This is how. And as I said earlier, obviously there are certain things that have to be done a certain way, because otherwise people will die if it's a real extreme. But when it's around how we as people work together, communicate together, all of these other things, if you're not the kind of majority neurotype, as it were, like the way at school you're supposed to sit down, absorb information in a certain way, write things, just learn, all of that stuff. If you're a minority, so dyslexic is one of them, you're going to end up not having the same opportunities. You do get marginalized, you do get treated badly. I mean, actually, I'm glad a lot of these dyslexic guys went and joined the army because they were very well suited to it. But it's a shame they had to do it through having felt humiliated and have their confidence destroyed in their ability to learn. So for me, neurodiversity now is, I did seek the diagnosis, which I'll come back to in a moment, but really it was quite unashamedly with a goal in sight, which was that the more people who get identified, and there are very rigorous ways of having these assessments, there are arguments about self-identifying, but I'm not going to go into that minefield right now. Because I understand the right for people to identify, but certainly there are pretty rigorous assessments to say, the way you're processing, is this really hardwired? It's not learned. It's not sort of related to traumatic past. It's not mental health. This is how you've arrived on the planet. And the more people who get identified as being outside of these cultural norms that we live through in workplaces and everywhere else, the more normal it'll become. And the more people will just be able to say, oh, that's my neurotype. Like, that's just me. And so dyslexia, they're all very, negative terms, but people like Richard Branson, of course, has said, the reason he's done so well is because he couldn't be employed, because of the way he thinks and does things is different. So he went his own way. Now, not everybody does. Some people find themselves unemployed and having a really, really terrible time. So we mustn't always look to the successful people. But that's my mission, really, is to get real about this, because the term neurodiversity was actually coined by a sociologist in Australia in the late 90s. It just wasn't in use till recently. It was lost in her thesis. She was very deliberately trying to start a bit of a human rights movement, she said, in that, particularly around what was then Asperger's, because she herself is, and she recognized her mum probably was, and certainly her daughter was diagnosed. But she really did want to launch a bit of a human rights movement, a bit like the Pride movement, that said, all those of us who just work differently in these ways, we are being really punished for it and told that we've got to conform. And the analogy I often use, because I'm left-handed, is it is like back in the days when left-handers were meant to be made to be right-handers. Way back, they were burned as witches, as it happens, but got a bit better than that, and then it was wrapped in a knuckle. But now I say it's a bit like if I go into a workplace and they say, we welcome diversity of all kinds, we gather you're left-handed, not a problem. We know only 10% of people left-handed. We want to make sure we've got plenty of left-handers. That's the diversity bit. But if I get into that workplace and they just say, oh, sorry, but everything around here is done right-handedly just because the majority of people are right-handed, to get over it. Then suddenly I'm being completely, I'm not in myself disabled.
You're not given an opportunity to succeed. You're not given an opportunity.
I'm being made to use the wrong hand. And so with the neurodiversity thing, she was pointing out, a bit like biodiversity, that the diversity of brain types in this particular way around information processing, communication, and very particular sensory processing information, that kind of thing. It is the diversity that has always been there. It's not a new thing in terms of it being a fact of life. What was new is her saying, we need to do better at this and stop telling everybody outside of these so-called norms that they have disorders that either need to be cured or treated with special accommodations. It's like, yes, it's more work to be more inclusive in that way, but let everyone have, there's a whole load of stuff around how workplaces can do that. For me, I did have lots of problems. I was bullied at school really badly. And also I've just always been kind of unusual in any big group of people I'm in. I'll always feel like, I'm kind of the odd one out in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And I could say more, but I've just the way that I've often, the way that I am when I'm interested in things, the way my brain works, the way I see things, the way I say things, I've got a tendency just to say what apparently everyone else is deliberately not saying.
Yeah.
And people have always used to say to me that I was really courageous to speak up when no one else dared. And I would be going, it's not courage. I just don't have the filters. I'm not making a special decision like, is this the right moment to say this for my sake and everyone else's? It's just kind of, I'm saying it because it didn't really occur to me that others had all these filters in place, if you know what I mean. So it's never been so bad. I've never been disciplined over it, but I just had a bad time. And the way I learned in school was just different. The way I absorb information, the way I make sense of things wasn't the way I did fine at school, actually, unlike some others. But I've had a very bad time in workplaces. So I guess after a lot of, this is the bit about, they call it intersectionality, but the different aspects of diversity. When I first started thinking I might be Asperger's, I did the classic ask Dr. Google. Just start trying to figure it out. And what I was finding is everything was describing men.
Really?
And not only men, but the very stereotyped, computer geeks and nerds, the kind of Silicon Valley, like the autistic adults must be geeky men who wear hoodies and sit in dark rooms and don't make eye contact. And I kept thinking, there are so many traits about Asperger's that I recognize, but I'm not recognizing myself in any of these descriptions or any of these stories. And then bit by bit by bit, I sort of left it alone for a few years and pondered it a bit more. The ADHD bit, I've always been completely hyper. Back to your question about why I joined the army, that when I was a barmaid, as it was called then, bar staff, always up a tree or playing football or just very, very, very physically active, very much unable to sit still, couldn't do lectures at university at all. I used to have to catch up on reading later, couldn't sit in a lecture hall and listen. It turns out I don't absorb information auditory very well at all, but I'm like a vacuum about reading. So
really,
I couldn't. I suffered badly in lectures. If people, give me auditory instructions, I kind of have to write them on a little sketch pad in my head. Or if someone tells me a number to remember, I have to see it written down. So
I love that.
Stuff like that, following. So there were lots of things I realized I don't do well, but luckily there were things that I do really well that got me through. So I found my own way of getting through my degree, and I was seen as being lazy for not attending lectures, and I felt really bad about myself for it. But years later, I realized what my problem was. Partly couldn't sit still and partly couldn't listen for long. So
I suppose it's around creating these tools within organizations to be able to facilitate different learning styles, so that we don't limit ourselves to people that think the same, learn the same. Because I suppose in doing so, we'd suffer from that, both from groupthink, but also subconsciously unknowingly alienate a large number of people who, such as yourself, do have a tremendous amount of tenacity and drive, but just simply go about development and the assimilation of information in a very different way.
Yeah, and there's some really simple things. So just quickly back to finish that loop, was that there was thankfully finally a time in the last 5 years where I sort of dipped back in and saw some articles, I think, and suddenly there were more and more women speaking about being Asperger's and or autistic. Is all kind of got lumped together. And I started following up and reading these accounts, and we're all different personalities, different life experiences. So we're not, none of us quite look the same, but the traits themselves were coming out. And I started to recognize it in myself more and more. And eventually I kind of got the courage. I was having difficult times in employed roles again for all the same reasons, again and again and again. And I took a bit of a sabbatical, went off traveling around Europe in a motorhome. And researched it more, and when I came back, I just decided I was going to go for it and get an assessment. So
So did
that
you
was
seek that
only,
through your GP or?
I actually didn't. I appreciate not everyone has the resource, but I'd saved up some money and I just paid to go and have an assessment because I knew if I went through the NHS, it would take years. But I
I think that's what
appreciate.
deters me from
Mm,
doing it. Not that I have a desire to have a certain label or anything like that, but something I speak about regularly on the podcast is like I'm only a watch commander in the fire service, so that's only two ranks above joining. You know, you're a firefighter, leading firefighter, and then a sub officer or watch commander or whatever it might be. But it's took me 22 promotion processes or selection processes to get through to this because I just struggled so much with some of the metrics and some of the ways that people wanted to have things said
it's all
and
very standardized, isn't it? That's the issue. Like I said, it is
yeah.
it's the making left-handed people right. It's the simplest way of looking at it. And this is where, as you said, but about your point of inclusion is it's not just get people in the door. It's saying, are you actually allowing them to thrive? Because, and sometimes it's seen as, oh, it's just not convenient. We've got to have norms. It's like, yeah, to a point, but actually, for it, there are so many norms that aren't actually necessary. For example,
Mm.
like the number of times in employed roles when I've had colleagues and or bosses say to me, Jackie, can't you just play the game?
Oh
And say
God,
that to an
that's
autistic
basically the
person. I
feedback
go,
I've
right,
had.
yeah. And I'd say, right, you've just called it a game.
Yeah.
And I'm very literal in my language. So I'm like, that's interesting. You just called it a game because that means you know it's a game and that you're playing it. And B,
Yeah.
I'm aware what the game is. And I possibly could have a go at playing it. But even if I were able to play it, probably wouldn't do very well. But also, I don't want to, thanks. Because it's that game that is the
God.
problem. Like, that is what's causing so many things not to work well, is because everyone's decided that they're going to play this game and it's really unhealthy. So that was one big thing for me. And then
How do
little
you not
things.
make yourself a martyr though when you're doing that? Because I know that's something for some of the things and the metrics that I've moved in, things that I've been involved with in the organisations that I've worked for in the emergency services were applauded and acknowledged, but they didn't fit to a specific metric that would be able to utilize in a process. So it would be things around outreach and innovative ways of coming up with solutions for community engagement and various
Mhm,
things like that.
mhm.
But it was always more like echoing back to that diversity analogy. We wanted people that looked different and perhaps had different backgrounds, but we still wanted people that thought the same, which made
Mhm.
which and it almost like just it made me scream internally because we speak about our desire for innovation and change and to adapt, and I think you can't do that if we keep having
No,
everybody
well, I think that's
thinking
the
the
problem. One of
same.
and
You're
it's
never going to
because,
get there.
yeah, and we do need. Well, I've said that throughout this, certain types of regulation, standardization. Like I said, back in the military, there were rules that made sense to me, and I'll follow them. I'm a real rule follower if I think they make
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
But then there were rules about how we women were supposed to conduct ourselves, or and I was like, that makes no sense, and I'm a complete rebel about that. I think that. So I think what happens is, depending on the sector, depending on but I think again, highly regulated sectors,
yeah.
the people who make it to the top, it does become less and less diverse because for all the reasons you're saying, there's all these
Yeah.
ways in which you don't get promoted unless you're a certain way.
Mm.
So the people who get to the top will have a very narrow, like if you've got that senior leadership group, they'll have got themselves to a point where they're all very similar to each other
Yeah.
in their preferences, their communication styles, their ways of sort of doing the politics. But also, let's say, some people argue that everything's got to be measurable and quantifiable, and that's just not true. I work enough with stuff that's human stuff. Some things are measurable, and that's great, and you can quantify them, like metrics for things. And other things are just not measurable in that way, and you shouldn't even be trying. And there are other ways for them to be valid, even if they haven't got a number next. I mean, numbers can make things completely meaningless, actually.
Oh yeah, and we
You've
can
asked me to
all
measure
cut
well-being, and
data
I'm like,
however we wish to suit our own stories as
yeah,
well.
like I've been asked, how quickly could I devise a well-being metric for employees? And I'm like, well, now ask
Yeah.
them 1 out of 10 how well they are.
Yeah.
So what you get 186 people saying 7. What's that told you? Nothing,
Yeah.
absolutely nothing, but you've got a metric.
Yeah.
Whereas you can find out all sorts of ways in which what you really mean is how is the work impacting on people's well-being, etc. So yeah, all that stuff. But the play the game, the kind of politics, it's like a game of how do I be somebody I'm not in order to get to the top? And that's just wrong. That's not inclusive. And it is harder work when you've got lots of different ways of communicating and seeing things, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't be accommodating that. And it can be simple things like meetings. Is that a lot of I don't want to stray into the dangers of stereotyping, but a lot of dyslexic friends, it can be announced highly creative thinkers. But along with being highly creative thinkers, and actually some autistic people, I'm the opposite. I tend to process information quite fast, to my own detriment sometimes, if you know what I mean, like speak before I've thought it through. But sometimes dyslexic people will say that, and some autistic, that they really need time to synthesize information.
Okay.
And come up with things. But when they come up with things, they can come up with the absolute total best creative, most innovative idea in the room. Yeah. But what will often happen is the meeting's already over.
Yeah,
everyone's
because
just been
the
chattering over each other.
blooming, that person that's just filled every silence with their enthusiasm and their just, their voice seems to have been the one that forced through an idea, whilst the slightly more reclusive thinker is still digesting the solutions.
And so sometimes there are little things you can do in meetings about just checking if there's a small team, it's not always possible, but checking, how does everyone prefer to, like some people want to know quite a lot of information before the meeting ahead of time. I'm very verbal, so I'm almost the opposite of that example, where I have to be careful. I make sense of things by talking. Because that's partly ADHD. If people are talking, because I'm not very auditory, everything that somebody says feels like it opens a new tab in my brain. Okay. And it's like 20 minutes into the meeting, I feel like I've got 25 tabs open. 6 of them are playing videos, 4 of them are playing music, that analogy. And my head's just ready to explode. I've got steam coming out my ears. Whereas if I speak, it sort of quietens the chatter down and I can think by speaking.
Okay.
But if I sit silently trying to make sense of everything everyone's saying, I just get to the point where I want to run out of the room. Yeah. So I sometimes just have to say to people, look, I'm quite a verbal thinker. I'm happy to absorb information, but it's good if people could use a whiteboard, or maybe we could put some notes together between us. So I can just say what my preferences are. And the more I've spoken up, the more I've noticed colleagues who don't have to have any kind of diagnostic label will start to go, it's a good point, I've just been trotting along to these meetings and realizing I don't absorb information this way either. I'm not getting my thoughts in here, and it's just not good for the businesses, because you're not getting the innovation, the problem solving. So one of the things with neurodiversity is to say, look, it isn't just a sort of another way of being nice to people and being that benign parental, let's take care of everyone. It is that, but it's also just saying, why on earth would you want to stifle the brains that you've got in your business? So
I think that's an important thing that we can try and consider when people are going about meetings and sort of groupthink ideas, when they're even on stations and smaller groups, is leaving space for thought, and not sort of confusing and need to find a solution, because we're so conditioned from our operational environments from, here's a problem, we need a solution now, time's against us, let's make a decision, let's hammer it out, let's get it done. Well, actually, that sort of construct doesn't need to exist in other environments, and will actually diminish the team's ability to come to the most collectively beneficial decision, I suppose.
Yeah, nice example I liked of that. I worked in engineering faculty at Bristol for a while on sort of systems thinking, complex problem solving, and the head of this centre was a professor of engineering, a background in civil engineering, industrial, become a professor, and he's dyslexic. And this is before I knew the term neurodiversity, but after I'd done some research at Sheffield. And I was fascinated because he would talk about the importance of sort of pattern thinking, and he put a lot of it down to him being dyslexic. And he told a story, and I can't remember if it was him he was referring to in the story, it doesn't really matter, of a good example of what you're saying, where a team of engineers looking at a railway station somewhere in the home counties, I think, somewhere going into London, but sort of imagine your sort of smallish station, but busy route, and a whole bunch of different planners and civil engineers and whoever the stakeholders in the room were, all trying to hammer out the fact that the trains they were putting more carriages on the trains, and the station platform's not long enough. And they were looking at all of these construction plans to work out lengthening the platform, this, that, and the other. And the person sitting in the room, which I think might have been him, not getting a word in, had to kind of pretty much speak up as everyone was leaving the room and say, I don't think this is an engineering problem. I think it's a communication problem. And they said, what do you mean? And he said, well, rather than building an entire extra stretch of platform with all the cost, time, etc. involved, why don't you just have a speaker ask everyone to go to the front 2 carriages?
Yeah.
which you'll now know well, anyone that commutes in and out.
Yes,
And that
yes,
happens to be
yes.
a dyslexic person. I'm sure there are others who come up with brilliantly innovative ideas, but the point was everyone was hammering it out with the same way of thinking,
Yeah.
that it had to be a kind of a construction engineering problem. It couldn't be something as simple as a so
Yeah.
and there's another really
Again, it
classic.
comes back to, I hate to keep using it, I probably need to come, but it comes back to hard and soft. We came up with we came up with a construction, bricks and mortar solution to a human behavioral problem.
Yes, and you've probably heard that phrase. I use it quite a bit, but it's something we all have to be careful of, which is if you're a hammer, the whole world's a nail. That we all like to
Absolutely.
bring our expertise, and yeah, we can all be guilty of getting into that very tunnel vision. Because the other example I liked about that type of thinking was that in the Second World War, when bomber aircraft were coming back from raids and
I know
looking
where
at
you're going to
where
go. I love this
remember
one.
this one, it was like
Yes.
they're basically saying, how do
Put
we
panels over the
reinforce that?
holes.
Yeah, like how do we keep reinforcing the parts of the aircraft where in the most holes are, because that's what's getting shot the most. And it was again somebody, and I had no idea if they were neurodivergent in the way that we would understand it now, but it was definitely someone. I'd looked into his history, and he was known to be quite an unusual character.
Yes.
But he was the one who said, you realize that you're examining all the ones that make it home safely.
Yeah.
They're being shot in the places that don't take them down, so
Absolutely.
you need to be reinforcing all the places where they've not been shot,
That was
because
great,
those are the
wasn't
ones
it?
that
I
aren't
remember. I
coming
think
home. And
that
it's
was
so
in.
obvious now.
Was that
Yeah,
in Black Box Thinking?
that's right. Absolutely. That's an
Oh,
example. I used
yeah,
to do
yeah.
some training sessions around black box for thinking for some.
It's a great book. I regularly reference it.
Yeah.
We actually had an interview with Martin Bromley,
Mm-hmm.
the husband of Elaine Bromley, because I think they're featured at the beginning of that book, and he's still a pilot for I won't share what, but he flies the Airbuses out of one of the large airports in the UK. Fascinating gentleman, and again, I'd strongly encourage people to go over it and have a look at that.
Yeah,
I
and then that
wanted,
doesn't explicitly talk about, I don't think, talk about neurodiversity, but that's the point about it. Is it's both about these diagnostic labels and it's not,
hmm,
but it is about how we can all get squished into trying to speak, think, feel, even communicate in the same ways. And you did ask a question earlier about how do you manage. I've forgotten how you worded it, but one thing I've noticed in workplaces that I've had to learn, or just in life anyway, is pick your battles. That
yes,
the way my head works is I see every little thing, because I take things literally as well. I look at every little thing that isn't quite right, and then I
hmm,
can run myself completely into the ground because
yeah.
I'm now because I decide I have to fix everything that doesn't look right or feel right, or and in
That's
the
where
end
you
I have
need
to be.
that effort reward matrix and try and
Yeah,
get those things in the easy quadrants and get that low hanging fruit and yeah.
and also be in environments that are not going to be so full of injustices and poor inclusion that I'm going to be getting set off every 5 minutes.
This is very true. I wanted to kind of close because one of the
Yeah.
things that I wanted to close with, sorry, is one of the things that brought us together, which was Lee speaking so highly, and I know this will be hard, not hard for people to believe, but one of the skill sets that really drew me to you is something we haven't even discussed yet, which was actually Lee, really doused you with praises in and around trauma. So Lee went through a period in his career, and I know he shared it on the podcast, so he won't mind speaking about it. Is where he experienced a series of traumatic events, and there's a lot happening in this space as well. Around, I suppose it comes into the mental health fold, but exposure to trauma, how we deal with and process it, how we can revisit it in a healthy manner. So I just, if you could just speak to us around trauma exposure, how we deal with it over time, and not necessarily specifically for Lee, but with people that you have supported with this, what strategies people may wish to consider if they are exposed to trauma on a regular basis.
Yeah, so it's the story of Liz. I met him at a charity. I was working as an advisor to a charity supporting emergency services, and I think it was after the time I'd actually spent some time employed as I said, heading up occupational health in a fire service. Um, and we got chatting. One thing I always feel the need, this is my very precise mind at work, but it feels important to me about integrity, is that I'm not a clinical psychologist, so
Mhm.
I don't treat trauma.
Yes.
What happened was I had talked about this health and safety approach and how, although it's, to your earlier point, it's a lot sort of messier and more complex than managing most physical risks, in as
Mm.
much as, most within reason, most skin burns in sort of similar ways, or fall off a ladder. Human bodies will kind of break and get injured in it. There are differences, but more similar, whereas human brains respond to things, talking of diversity, such diverse ways based on our
health
early
and
life
safety in a physical world is more binary, I suppose, isn't it?
It is. I don't want to do it down as it not
No. Yeah, it's not a simple sector to work in, but it is. It's more binary, I think.
But my point was, what happened with me was, after having worked in the military and then having done my doctorate, I was 6 years as an academic, but didn't suit being an academic. I wanted to be out in the real world doing practical things and getting on with it. Really, academic stuff moves very slowly. But I'd come out and I was self-employed. One of the things I was doing then was this hostile environment training that at that point was with primarily journalists who were going out to conflict zones, but also humanitarian aid workers. Okay. And the reason initially I had been asked by actually somebody I knew, would I go and be a freelance trainer in these teams? It's partly because they didn't have enough women representing. It was much more to do with my military background and teaching safety awareness, weapons awareness, and understanding responding to blasts. And then there was a first aid element that we had fire service medics often, but also ex-army medics teaching that. I'd usually be the casualty on the floor bleeding for those bits. But so I was brought in actually around that because they were saying, of course, there are plenty of women journalists, and we've got these teams almost entirely of ex-military and sort of emergency services men. And so I was more than happy to say, well, yeah, I've got the military background, I've got the knowledge, the skills, so that would be great. But when I got on it and they realized I'd also got this psychology background, I was asked to run the 1 hour, on a 6-day course, the 1 hour, PTSD awareness. Oh, wow. That was just, this is a human brain. This is what happens to human brains when they get a traumatic experience. And this is the symptoms and how to spot them. And this is where you get help. And I just found myself scratching my head talking of different ways of thinking. And I was like, this doesn't make a great deal of sense to me, actually, that you'd have just 1 hour telling you how to spot that the injury's already occurred and get medical treatment when you've got 6 days of helping them not get physically hurt in the first place. Yeah. So I just started thinking about it that way and going, I'd got this risk psychology background, but it wasn't quite the same. I'd been looking at how people respond to physical risks in the natural environment and all of the stuff we've talked about. But I just started to think, how far could we go when they've got jobs where some of these risks are foreseeable? Like it's not just about the trauma, but it's the types of scenarios they're going into, the types of things they're exposed to. And to your point about someone in a supermarket, that, they might get abused, but that's like low probability, even if it could be high impact. Yes. But you're talking about professions where it's high probability as well as potentially high impact, right? And that in the law is saying you can't just say, well, these things hardly ever happen. It's like, this is the person's job. Whereas, abuse in another type of work.
And also, we've got a track record. This is not a new innovative field that's only just occurred in the last 10 years because of a change in technology. These are frontline operators, military,
right?
Police.
And the more you
look, they've been doing it for many, many, many decades. We know the effects.
Yes, and we know that when people are, incredibly well trained for the jobs they do, they know what to expect. They've got each other's backs. You've got hopefully often good team cohesion, blah blah blah, loads of buffers against anyone having the really, it's not a given that going into what could be a traumatic incident is going to traumatize somebody. You'll know that very well. Because it depends on your expectations, your background, your training, your own feeling of agency, that this is the job you're here to do. So the psychology research shows there are tons of buffers, and that's why so many people do so well. But so I just want
buffers are diminishing, though. Sorry to interrupt, but I feel like as we have a little bit of societal breakdown at the minute, not to dramatize, but I think technology and things like social media and the way in which we now communicate and almost we've never been so connected, yet many people also have never felt so isolated. I think there's a shift in societal communication, which is leading to greater feelings of loneliness or isolation. And I'm probably stretching out on a bit of a limb there. So please
I would agree with you. I mean, because looking at employee wellbeing now, it's this thing about my primary area of expertise is looking at how workplaces and the work itself can potentially be hazardous to people's psychological health. But if you work in employee, I've had to look at all the ways in which the wider world impacts people's well-being, and when they come to work, they've got varying degrees of, as you say, it's not lack of resilience, but just depleted by a pandemic, and a health service doesn't work, and sick relatives, and cost of living, and just uncertainty and instability in a way that some of it's good because people aren't so fixed in their ways. You don't have the career for life, the marriage for life, the kind of, but family units are break. So exactly that. I think there are a lot of ways in which people are depleted.
Yes.
And that is always going to just taking away your own resources to cope with things. So that is bad. So exactly that. There are buffers and then there are things that deplete. I think it's important, though, to say that doing a job that to the sort of layperson looks like it could be pretty traumatic doesn't necessarily mean, we know this from military, we know it from frontline healthcare, we know it from firefighters and other emergency services, that not everyone is going down with PTSD. However, what's not good is to suggest that those who do come undone are somehow necessarily weaker. It's a whole load of complex things coming to play. So I guess I embarked on this thing saying we're never, a bit like in physical health and safety, there will still be times when accidents happen, injuries occur, lives are lost, etc. Same with psychological. There are times when people are going to find that they didn't see it coming, or there was that one event that took them over the edge, or just that one event was so big it wiped their feet from under them psychologically.
Yeah.
However, there are loads and loads and loads of ways in which the job, in foreseeable ways, can just drip, drip, drip at somebody's psychological well-being cumulatively. And we do know this: vicarious trauma, cumulative trauma, etc. And it does sometimes depend on early life factors and people's coping mechanisms and how cohesive people are and how much they feel they can speak up and all the other things we've talked about. So I got into it initially with journalists, then aid workers. Then I was asked to work with emergency services. I'd obviously had the military background. So by the time I met Lee, I had just been speaking about this kind of concept of how far, rather than just say it's too complicated, so we're just going to keep doing trauma awareness, where apparently every brain's the same. There are some aspects of our brains that are all the same for sure, but we're also very different. So I said, how do we take a good big step past this trauma awareness model that says it'll be very imperfect, but we can do some amount of risk managing, particularly in professionals where it is so foreseeable. The probability of going into these types of environments with people who are distressed and traumatized themselves, and then not get so hung up on the label of PTSD, because trauma with a small t is a word that's used a lot. I've heard people talk about a traumatic email inbox, if you know what I mean, meaning it's just really full. But there's a big difference between something being, potentially traumatizing versus having ultimately a quite large long-term psychological injury that would be termed PTSD in its various different forms of complex, cumulative, etc. So that sort of distress and trauma, there are ways in which definitely I have learned firsthand by trying it out that individuals can be trained to have to be better equipped and empowered and have tools and resources available, including self-knowledge and peer support, in order to reduce the likelihood of some of these more cumulative traumas, so processing things as they're going along. And that's really where my conversations with Lee came. And again, he's written his book and he's put a little bit in his book about my work with him, so I'm not saying anything he hasn't put out there. I wouldn't talk about anything else, but I was just explaining to Lee how they call it psychoeducation rather than psychotherapy, that how my approach works. And the more I was explaining to him, the more he was kind of applying it to himself and going, oh wow, that even when he'd already been through a whole load of experiences, I was thinking and saying, look, I'm not clinical, I can't treat trauma. So really, I was just explaining it in a very educational way. I never formally trained him. But he was finding that way of one-to-one sort of almost tutoring was still having a really good effect. Absolutely. And that when he paired that, with all the other resources he was looking to access to support himself, he said it made an enormous difference to him. And I know that when I've taught this approach in other sectors, including journalists, content moderations and social media, where very high volume of, they're physically removed from it, but there's a high volume of very distressing content they're dealing with around child abuse and beheadings and all sorts of stuff, often, without a great deal of training and preparation or peer support, etc. So I know that it certainly is no magic bullet, but I know that there is a lot more that can be done to equip people for these foreseeable risks that are psychological than is currently being done. And I do feel quite fierce about that.
I think there's a massive scope for work in that sector, and I wonder if we could just explore it ever so slightly in terms of, because you have worked both with Facebook, also with TikTok, around teams are exposed to graphic and objectionable online content. But I wanted to see if we could try and pick out a couple of strategies to help people, because whilst it is relevant to the individuals that work in places like these big social media companies, but also relevant to people that work in the emergency services sector and their exposure to graphic photos and case studies, but also now for the wider public, as we seem to have had complete free reign to look at some fairly horrific things online through TikTok, through YouTube, through wherever else. Are there any strategies that you could lend us or sort of give us the thread of, for people to then go down the rabbit hole if they wish, to learn a little bit more about how they could deal with these things?
Yes. So yeah, absolutely. So the first thing I'd say as well is one of the biggest challenges I've found, particularly around content moderation, but it may be the case, in your sector as well, is this is slightly back to workplaces or managers, is just never assuming what you think it is that gets to people. And what I mean by that is a lot of the stuff in content moderation was, can you train content moderators to deal with what used to be called graphic and objectionable? We tend to just say potentially harmful content, because if it wasn't potentially harmful, it wouldn't be being removed off the platform by them in the first place, if you know what I mean.
Of course, yeah. So
graphic and objectionable is a bit of a subject. So anyway, the point is we talk about potentially harmful, but a lot of the time there's this assumption of, can you train them to deal with, graphic, that type of imagery? And I can say sure, but have you asked them if that's what bothers them the most? And the reason I mention it is it can bother people a lot. There have been lawsuits about this, but in every sector I've worked in, if you don't check out what bothers people the most, they feel like they're obliged to find certain things distressing and other things not. So in the content moderation sector, rapid random policy changes that they've got to keep following and remembering often cause more distress to them than the content they were viewing, as did or does, for example, just poor team cohesion, or ill-equipped managers, and or conflict, and or all the stuff you'd be thinking, oh, but isn't that just boring everyday stuff? It's like, well, check out what it is, because I remember some of these moderators saying, oh, I feel as if I'm being told I'm supposed to be bothered by things more than I am. Like some would say, I can't stand.
I think we find that in changes, like you say, around what people we assume people are offended by, and then you can find a collective of individuals who find, well, actually, no, as long as it's being done so in a respectful manner and in a grown-up conversation, I'm not remotely offended by that, but you're telling me I should be.
Right, exactly. And it's like when I used to absolutely love some of the banter that we had between, particularly when I was the only woman on the pilot's course, and I'd kind of set the banter off half the time with, whether I was going to make them all a cup of tea. But the point is, some people would not like the banter the way it was, but I agree, it's got to be the person who's involved in it. So there's that part, but just also the reason I mention it is that it can cause an extra layer of distress if people are going, am I supposed to be bothered by this because someone else says I am? And I wondered if it might happen sometimes in your sector around, we're all bothered by different things, and we shouldn't be asking people suddenly to start assuming they're meant, like, well, am I meant to be starting to get PTSD here because apparently what I do is so traumatizing? And going, not necessarily. So part of my approach always is to just make sure organizations give the opportunity for employees to tell them what they're finding the most hazardous in their job, and to tell them what's impacting on them the most, instead of just being told it must be this, therefore have these strategies. That said, in terms of tangible things, one thing I found people really grateful for is being invited to talk about their own, and to think about it for themselves, to go, good point, what does bother me the most? But then in terms of strategies, we live in a culture in, say, the Western world, whatever best way to put it, there has become a real almost obsession, what we call the talking therapies. That, whatever your problem is, speak up, speak about it. And that can be really important, don't get me wrong, in cultures where there's been this kind of stiff upper lip, particularly for men, don't ever say when you're struggling, don't ever say when there's anything bothering you. So I don't want to undermine how important talking is. But one of the things I teach people is to say, when something happens to you that has hit you psychologically, your response to it won't just be in your mind, it'll be in your body, and it'll be in your emotions, it'll be in your sensory processing, it'll be in your ways of thinking. Does that make sense? Like it's going to be hitting you at loads of ways in one go. And if somebody afterwards thinks, right, I know that really got to me, some incident, something that occurred that really got to me, if they just keep being told to talk about it, or phone a counselling helpline, or tell a mate, that might work for some of it, like saying it out loud.
Yeah.
But what can happen is people are not helping themselves through the rest of it. So, for example, that is it common across the fire services to refer to having a fire brew?
Yep, 100%. Yep.
But that so
Having
that
those
fire
those
brew
post-instant hot debriefs where
and
we're
that sort of
encouraged to all discuss what's just happened.
right. Now, one thing to mention is sometimes people will absolutely not want to say a word in those environments, and that's really important. That for
Most
some
of the
people,
time, barely anybody says anything. You
right,
have a couple of people, usually the person in charge will talk through the strategic and tactical elements of the incident and just a few facts, but nothing else really gets said in that
well, it's
first.
something to be mindful in general about. Yeah, this whole speaking up thing isn't for everyone, and it's not for some people ever, and it's not for some people some of the time. But the point being is, speaking up has its place. But let's say somebody does make a joke, and it
Yeah.
sort of discharges a load of raucous laughter.
Hmm.
Everybody in that, literally every physical body in that room has just discharged a load of adrenaline that might have been hanging around,
Yeah.
that can cause fatigue and aches and just general not feeling right.
Mhm.
So it's like helping the body and the mind through the different aspects of a distressing incident. There are loads of things individuals can do for themselves. So, for example, and it depends whether it's an individual incident or whether something's cumulative, is that the way I teach it is to say, well, there's your bodily response, there's your thinking, there are your emotions, there are your behaviors that come of it. And you can start to look at tangible ways to say, right, did my body just take a hit? Meaning, have I just had a big discharge of adrenaline?
Yeah.
Because if I did and I didn't use it up by physically having to do something incredibly active in that moment, if it was more of a psychological hit, you actually talking isn't going to really help. You're still going to end up probably falling out with someone or picking an argument or getting home and having an argument with your fridge door or something. Do you know what I mean? It's
Yes.
not gone away, or you're going to end up with bodily digestive problems and all sorts of ways in which your poor body needed some help through that.
Yeah.
There's also stuff around how your thinking can start to get distorted. Is it your thinking that needs some help? And if so, is it through talking? But that would be quite a problem solving type of talking that says, I need to talk this through because I'm starting to see. One example is in content moderation. It may not be great. I don't know how applicable it is. You can tell me. But if content moderators are reading an awful lot of hate speech and or seeing an awful lot of awful child sort of grooming, etc., they can just
Yeah.
start thinking. It can get distorted in their perceptions about how other people are in the world, or how
Yes.
many people are like that. And I don't
Mhm.
know what a good example would be, but the beginnings of distorted thinking can be rectified by just an individual reset, a bit of sense check. It could be for some people just to read some good. Some of the journalists I used to go and read good news stories if they'd had a bit too much
Well,
to
you've got to
fulfill.
balance it out, yeah. Otherwise, you assume that, like you said, the whole world is out to get you, or nobody cares about you, or nobody cares about each other. And you can see that certainly in the emergency services. If you see a lot of doom and gloom, and you go into a lot of households and a lot of people faced with socioeconomic challenges, and you assume that everyone has low standards and nobody cares about their neighbor, and that's not true. It's
No, and
just
I
the
think
people that
that's
struggle most in society are sometimes those who have had challenges with their own moral compass. That's not an indicator of what all of society is like.
yeah, and that's why sometimes it can be. It sounds a bit obvious when I say it, but sometimes it's an individual sense check of just right. Hang on a minute. Do I need a quick word with myself here? Like I'm spiraling into some thoughts that are probably not very helpful. Can that be a reset? Is it
Yeah,
worth checking it out with a mate? And if that's a cultural thing, though, to remember in teams is that it's so easy sometimes if you're tired and you're pressured and you're a bit stressed yourself, and someone says something to you just to go, oh, you're being paranoid or don't ridiculous, and trying to
mm,
remember to just take a moment and not, if someone's brought something, just take it seriously for a minute. That's
yeah,
obviously where they're coming from. Don't judge, just hold
hmm,
off the judgment and just check it out with them. So that's the stuff you can do around thinking. Some of the sensory stuff, there's even research on before sort of traumatic memories get embedded, you can disrupt them by playing games like Tetris, believe it or not, especially
yeah,
visual memories, seeing something really distressing, and they've done experiments on it that it can stop the memories getting embedded such that they come back as flashbacks and intrusive memories.
yeah,
The experiment was specifically Tetris, but I've talked to clinical psychologists who've said they can't verify that other things would work, but a visual kind of game where you've got to, think a bit, but also,
wow,
it's quite mentally stimulating. It just after an event, it can be probably quite calming for the nervous system as well.
yeah,
They're bringing your nervous system down. So things
that's
like that. I mean,
fascinating.
there's only so much I can probably say on one podcast, and then there's the emotional bit, like I said, where sometimes people try to talk about things when what they needed was an emotional discharge. So when I work with content moderators, I remember one of the team leads saying, "Oh, we talk about if someone says they're having a bad day and they want to talk, or they want some support, we've got used to asking if they want comfort or solutions. And it was a beautiful
Very
way of
good.
saying what I was saying, which
Very
was,
good
do you
thought.
want some help to problem solve? Like, do you need to actually talk through something where you want the other person's input about their, maybe not advice, but their thoughts, their perspective? That's a very cognitive, it's a very thinking thing. And sometimes we all need a bit of that. But other times we just want someone to say, that's awful.
Yeah.
No wonder you feel like that.
Yeah.
And help them just have a bit of a
Just for
rant.
someone to say, I hear you. Yeah. I hear
Got
you.
you, like, and say, you just need a rant. And so that comfort or solution. So comfort bit meant, if you just need to have a bit of an outburst for 5 minutes, I'll just listen. And I won't step in, and I won't try to fix it, and I won't judge you. I'll just listen, and that is a discharge of an emotion. So what can happen with us all is we just get all mixed up, and we start trying to fix, emotions and bodily sensations through talking, or we try to, we kind of don't do the things that can help our system reset, if that makes sense. And just by breaking it down a little bit, I know we're actually one big system all going at once, but I have spent quite a lot of time working on this with clinical psychologists who are experts in trauma, and said that if people can be taught to do this, particularly one very senior psychologist who works in veterans mental health care, dealing with a lot of sort of long untreated, very embedded PTSD. And he has agreed with me that individuals being able to do some of this for themselves and for each other in a workplace context with this constant, exposure, he truly, truly does believe that would reduce the number of people who would end up.
Yeah, I think that's something sometimes that actually discourages people from trying things like this, because we forgive ourselves by evidence in an extreme case where someone has taken their life, or some of the truly extreme cases, and go, well, that would have been a solution for John. And you go, well, yeah, John is maybe the 2% where John genuinely did need professional one-to-one help. But actually, there's also a large land grab that we can help people through empowering us through these strategies. And having a little bit more, with the greatest of respect, like accountability about utilizing these solutions for peer support, rather than that sort of shoulder slope into, everybody needs one-to-one professional help, probably for the very small number.
Exactly. And there's an understandable fear. And again, I do a lot of work with this in different workplaces, that particularly, frontline managers, but also just peer support, there is this fear of, I'm not a therapist, but I'm not this, but I'm not that. Going, well, quite right, and nor should you try to be. But there's a big difference between that and what I would call just being a skilled peer. Yeah. And being a skilled peer means it's one step above just going, you'll be right, mate, or don't be paranoid, or just a little bit of extra awareness that makes you check yourself in the moment and think. A friend of mine who's a retired firefighter talked about an example where he'd gone to a call out that was to do with a baby that died. Mm-hmm. And he came back, and he was a bit shaken up, but he just knew that it was the middle of the night and he just wanted to get back to bed. And the person he was with, who I think I remember him saying was senior to him, said to him before they parted company, sort of said, "Are you all right, mate?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just want to get back to my bed." And it didn't occur to him in that moment to ask the question back. Yes. Particularly because the person was one step more senior to him, possibly, watch kind or whatever. Anyway, he went off to bed in the morning. Anyway, that person signed off sick the next day, and he didn't see him again. Wow. And he just felt really like, he was like, missed a trick there. He was asking me if I was all right because he kind of needed me to ask him if he was. And it's that. So being a more skilled peer can be as little as just take that moment, take a breath. Yeah. Don't come out with something that might be inadvertently judgmental or irritable, or leave the person feeling a bit smaller or wishing they hadn't said anything. But also, to your earlier point, like that, if it's a pie chart or a continuum or whatever, you're quite right. It's like there are some people who may never need any of this. I mean, they're a fairly rare breed who don't need any time ever to hope that they could have more techniques to take care of themselves or each other. But there are some
who may very well be a functioning sociopath as well, because there are a lot of those individuals in the sectors.
Well, one sort of not always spotted sign of trauma is the numbing out and shutting down and becoming just a much more narrow version of yourself. But I guess my point is there are people who perhaps won't need a great deal, and that's fine. And then to your point, there are going to be times when people need a lot of help, and that should also be fine. But exactly that, we don't just say, well, because some people are broadly fine, or at least functioning, and because others need high-level clinical care and or not to do the job anymore, it doesn't mean we don't spend our time on what could be the 90% or more in the middle, who you could just help them be more skilled in relation to themselves and each other, without trying to be therapists, because that is an important boundary.
100%. I think there's so much to be learned from that. And also, you said it there yourself about, whether somebody just needs somebody to compassionately listen versus that expectation. And we're probably quite bad for it in sectors like emergency services and armed personnel and stuff like that, in being solution orientated, being a problem solver. Whereas sometimes people just need to feel heard. I think there's a lot
this one's download sometimes, and it isn't it's not just the words, it's the actual emotional discharge that gets underestimated. If someone comes in to fix, sort of to interrupt the mid-flow to fix, it can infuriate somebody because they're just wanting that emotion to spill out.
I really love it, and it might sound quite morbid or sad, but like it's many of the skills that I try and utilize when I'm doing podcasting, and I think it's something that's really helped my sense of active listening and maybe emotional intelligence, is because I just pick up those very same tools time and time again of being an active listener, of paraphrasing, of mirroring what the other, and I'm not giving any solutions, I'm not giving any answers, and I'm not perfect, for goodness sake, but I think people would be astonished about how many healthy interactions they would have and how much value they could unknowingly add to people's well-being by just practicing a few of them skills.
Exactly.
And I think there's a lot to be said for that. Jaqui, I've absolutely loved our conversation today. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time, more than anything else, in all honesty. I want to just give people a few signposts for anybody that might want to learn a little bit more. Now, you're currently an associate consultant in the neurodiversity that you spoke about with Optimize, is that right?
That's correct.
Beautiful. And you're also a co-founder and director with Safety in Mind and a visiting research fellow for University of Leeds. If people do want to learn a little bit more about you, where would you most prefer them to go? Is there a place that you like to direct people?
I think LinkedIn is the most obvious, probably. I do have a website for safetyinmind.org, but actually there's a route to that through LinkedIn anyway. So as you said, my neurodiversity work is primarily, but not only, through Optimize. I do stuff independently. The psychological health and safety is mainly, I do that through Safety in Mind. Well, as in that is my business. The Leeds University is more on the environment. I've still kept my hand in on the environmental psychology stuff because it's a personal interest of mine. But everything we've talked about today would really come under the neurodiversity consulting and the Safety in Mind.
God, I love that. We've gone in so many directions today, Jaqui. I really want to thank you for that. I will drop a link to your LinkedIn in the notes for this podcast. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
No problem. It's been a pleasure. Really interesting to talk to you and hear your perspectives as well, actually.
Thank you very much. And I look forward to speaking with you soon.
All right. Take care.
The Firefighters podcast is a global podcast seeking to develop, inspire, and motivate the world of the emergency services operators. Through a series of wide-ranging conversations celebrating those within our sector, we seek to encourage and support this incredible group of people. It's brought to you by myself, operational firefighter Pete Wakefield, and I speak with individuals from all walks of life who I sincerely believe can add value to or develop those who have chosen this life path. Please support your emergency services wherever you are in the world, and thank you for listening.